Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into The Fiction Wizard, presenting to you today. Amelia Bones summoned Vernon Dursley to the DMLE at dawn. He never walked out the front door. Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1. The report. The owl arrived at 4:30 in the morning. Amelia Bones was already awake. She usually was at this hour, not because she couldn't sleep, but because the stack of reports on her desk didn't get any shorter by her lying in bed thinking about them, and she had long since stopped pretending otherwise. She had a pot of tea going, a fire that had been burning since 3, and the particular brand of focused quiet that came with knowing the rest of the ministry was empty. These early hours were hers. She did her best thinking in them. The owl dropped a slim folder onto her desk and left without waiting for a treat, which told her it was a ministry bird and not a personal one. She picked up the folder without urgency. Interdepartmental routing at this hour usually meant something that had been flagged overnight by the monitoring charms, accidental magic reports, mostly. Children dreaming and setting curtains on fire, that sort of thing. She handled more of those than people realized. The DMLE's mandate extended to the monitoring and protection of underage magical signatures, and Amelia took every aspect of her mandate seriously. She opened the folder. The first page was the standard accidental magic incident report. A 7-year-old boy, one Harry James Potter, residing at No. 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. Flagged for an uncontrolled burst of accidental magic on the night of the 14th, significant enough to register on 3 separate ministry instruments. The nature of the burst was listed as emotional distress, category severe. The signature was remarkable. The instruments had apparently needed recalibrating afterward, which was unusual for a child of 7, but that wasn't what made Amelia stop. Beneath the incident report, attached by a standard ministry clip, was the routine welfare check that had been triggered by the flag. When accidental magic was classified as severe emotional distress in a child under 10, protocol required a basic wellness review. It was supposed to be a formality. It usually was. She read the welfare check. Then she read it again. The fire crackled. Her tea went cold. Outside her window, London was still dark, still sleeping, the sky the particular thick blue that comes just before the city starts to think about waking. Amelia Bones sat very still for a long time, which was not something she did often. The welfare check had been compiled from 2 sources, a ministry observation charm attached to the address since 1981, and a cross-referenced Muggle medical file that the DMLE's Muggle liaison sub-office had pulled as part of the automated wellness review. The observation charm data was almost comically benign on its face. The boy ate, slept, attended a local primary school, performed adequately in his lessons. The Muggle medical file was something else entirely. 3 visits to a local Muggle clinic in the last 4 years. Each one listed injuries consistent with falls. The attending Muggle healer, doctor, she reminded herself, they were called doctors, had noted in the file, in the careful hedging language of someone who suspected something and couldn't prove it, that the pattern of bruising on the second visit was inconsistent with the stated cause. The third file had a single line at the bottom in a different handwriting, added later, which read, referred to social services for follow-up. Follow-up not completed. The boy's weight at his last recorded examination was in the 2nd percentile for his age group. The Muggle doctor had written, also carefully, the words possible nutritional neglect and underlined them. Amelia set the folder down on her desk. She picked up her quill. She put it down again. She stood up, walked to her window, and stood looking out at the dark city for approximately 45 seconds. Then she walked back to her desk, sat down, and opened her bottom drawer where she kept the forms that required her personal seal, not the standard rubber DMLE stamp, but her actual seal, the one that carried the full legal weight of the department's head. She had used it perhaps a dozen times in 15 years. She pulled 3 forms from the drawer. A summons for voluntary interview, which was not, despite the name, in any sense voluntary. A custodial review warrant, which authorized the ministry to conduct a welfare investigation that superseded Muggle legal jurisdiction when a magical child's well-being was at risk. And a third form, one that required countersignature from the senior legal counsel and that she had personally never used before, which was a temporary protective removal order. She filled all three out. She sealed all three. Then she wrote a short, precise memo to senior legal counsel Griselda Marchbanks, who was 73 years old and had been known to wake at any hour for a legal crisis, and attached it to an office owl. The owl left. Amelia poured her cold tea into the small heating charm on her desk, waited for it to warm, and drank it while she reread the medical file a third time. By 6 a.m, Griselda Marchbanks was sitting across from her, reading the same file, with the specific expression of someone who has seen a great deal in their life and is still capable of being appalled. The observation charm has been running since 1981, Griselda said. She had a voice like old parchment, dry, authoritative, not given to unnecessary softness. 5 years. Who was reviewing the outputs? Formally, the Muggle Liaison Sub-Office. Amelia kept her voice even. In practice, I suspect no one was looking at it in any meaningful way. It was flagged as a passive monitor, not an active welfare case. The sub-office is understaffed and the passive monitor queue is 300 cases long. I know. Griselda set the file down. This child is Harry Potter. Yes. Dumbledore placed him there. Yes. Griselda looked at her for a moment. You understand what you're opening. I understand what I found. Amelia's voice was perfectly level. A 7-year-old magical child is showing signs of physical abuse and nutritional neglect in his registered place of residence. That is not a political situation, Griselda. That is a welfare emergency, and the Department of Magical Law Enforcement has both the mandate and the legal obligation to act on it. She paused. The paperwork is already filled out. I just need your countersignature on the removal order. Griselda looked at the form for a long moment. Then she picked up her quill and signed it without another word, which told Amelia everything about where Griselda's priorities sat when it came down to the bone of it. The summons, Griselda said, capping her quill. You're bringing in the uncle. Vernon Dursley. Yes. This morning. Not the aunt? Mr. Dursley is listed as the head of household and the registered legal guardian of the child. I'll start with him. Amelia folded the signed removal order and placed it in the file. The aunt may follow, depending on what Mr. Dursley has to say. Griselda stood, smoothing her robes. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair and the kind of posture that suggested she had never once slouched in her life. Do you want me in the room? Amelia considered it. No. But I want you close. I'll be in my office. Griselda moved toward the door, then stopped. Amelia. He's going to claim ignorance. He's going to say the boy was clumsy, was difficult, caused problems. They always say the same things. I know. You have the medical file. You have the observation data. But a Muggle in a ministry interrogation room is going to be frightened, and a frightened man says what he thinks will protect him, not what's true. I know that too. Amelia looked up at her. That's why I'm going to let him be frightened for a while before I say anything useful. Griselda gave the small, tight smile of someone who had known Amelia Bones for 30 years and was not surprised in the slightest. She left. The door closed with a soft click. Amelia reached for her quill again and began to draft the summons. Vernon Dursley received the summons at 7:15 in the morning, delivered by a ministry owl that tapped on the kitchen window with a firmness that made Petunia knock over her orange juice. Vernon was in his dressing gown, which he felt was important to note because it established that he had been at home, minding his own business, a perfectly normal man living a perfectly normal life, when all of this started. He would later think about this moment many times, the tap of the owl, Petunia's sharp intake of breath, Dudley still upstairs and asleep, the boy somewhere in the background doing whatever the boy did in the mornings. He would think about it and try to find the moment where he could have done something different. He couldn't find it. That was the thing. If you didn't answer a ministry summons, and the letter made extremely clear that it was a summons and not a request, then 2 ministry officials would arrive at your door, and Vernon Dursley valued his neighborhood's opinion of him considerably more than he valued his own comfort. So he dressed. He ate his breakfast, though not much of it. He told Petunia it was routine, which he told himself was probably true. He drove to the train station and caught the early service to London, and arrived at the Ministry of Magic's visitor entrance, a telephone box on a back street in Westminster that he had been shown once before, 6 years ago, when they'd first signed whatever papers they'd signed, at 9:05. The ministry was quieter in the morning than he'd expected. The atrium had a few witches and wizards crossing it with the purposeful stride of people going to work, not giving him a second look, though Vernon gave all of them several looks each because he could never quite get comfortable with the robes and the hats. He was directed to the second floor by a tired-looking witch at an information desk. She didn't look at him either. He took the lift. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement was not what he'd imagined, which had been something darker, more dramatic. It looked, in the main, like an ordinary government office, open desks, stacked files, a few people moving between them. There was a reception area. A young wizard at the desk asked his name, found it on a list, and led him down a corridor without much ceremony. He was shown into a room. The room was small and contained a table, 2 chairs, a lamp, and nothing else of any comfort. Vernon sat in the chair facing the door because it seemed like the right choice. He waited. There was no clock, which he found irritating. He thought about asking for a cup of tea and then decided against it. He straightened his tie. After what he estimated was about 20 minutes, the door opened. The woman who came in was not what Vernon had prepared himself for. He'd imagined someone young, perhaps, someone with a file who would ask him to sign some form, something about the boy's magic. Accidents happened, he knew that, couldn't be helped, awkward business, but there it was. The woman who came in was perhaps 50, broad-shouldered, with short gray hair and a face that was not unkind but was, very clearly, not soft. She wore deep blue robes and a monocle on a chain at her breast that she didn't use. She carried a folder. She put it on the table. She sat down across from him without introducing herself, which Vernon found immediately wrong-footing. She looked at him for a moment without saying anything. "I'm sorry," Vernon said, because the silence was uncomfortable. I don't quite know what this is regarding, Mr. Dursley." Her voice was quiet and clear and had the quality of something with a lot of weight behind it. "My name is Amelia Bones. I am the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. You are here this morning because we need to discuss the welfare of your nephew, Harry Potter, who resides at your home at number 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey." "Right," Vernon said. "Right, yes, I assume this is about the incident the other night, the magic business. Tell me about his bedroom," Amelia said. Vernon blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "His bedroom. Describe it to me." He has a room, perfectly adequate, the boy has." Vernon stopped. Something in her face made him stop. It wasn't expression, exactly. She was watching him the way that very still water watches things. "He has the small room," he said. "At the top of the stairs." She opened the folder. She did not look at it yet. "How long has he had the small room at the top of the stairs?" "Since, well, we moved him there when Dudley needed the space. Before that." Vernon's collar felt tight. "Before that he was in the cupboard. Under the stairs." "It was just a temporary. From what age?" From when we took him in, but he was 15 months old when he came to live with you," Amelia Bones said. Her voice hadn't changed at all. "He lived in a cupboard under the stairs from the age of 15 months. You moved him to the small bedroom, when, exactly?" I don't remember the exact, we have his school records, she said. She opened the folder and laid a single sheet on the table between them. His primary school application lists his address as the cupboard under the stairs at number 4 Privet Drive. This form was filled out in your handwriting and signed by you, Mr. Dursley. He was 4 years old. Vernon looked at the form. He remembered filling it out. He remembered thinking, at the time, that it was just a form, nobody would look at it. It wasn't, it was just where the boy slept, it wasn't. We also have, Amelia continued, turning to a second page in the folder, the records from the Muggle medical practice in Little Whinging where Harry was seen on 3 separate occasions. I'd like to talk about those visits. Children get hurt, Vernon said. He heard something wrong in his own voice and made himself stop, slow down. Children fall. They're clumsy, Harry's weight at his last recorded medical examination, Amelia said, was in the 2nd percentile for a boy of his age and height. Do you know what the 2nd percentile means, Mr. Dursley? Vernon said nothing. It means that 98% of boys his age and size weigh more than he does. It means he is significantly, measurably underweight. She paused. The doctor who examined him used the phrase possible nutritional neglect. She referred the case to social services. A follow-up visit was never conducted because the social worker assigned to the case left the department and the file fell through the cracks. She looked at him, not unkindly, but with absolute directness. I would like to know what Harry ate yesterday. Specifically. Walk me through it. The silence that followed was of a different quality than the previous silences. It had a shape to it. He eats with the family, Vernon said. Does he? Of course he does. At the table. Where else would? Vernon stopped. Amelia Bones folded her hands on top of the folder and looked at him with the patient, unhurried quality of someone who already has the ending of the story and is simply letting him find his own way there. Mr. Dursley, she said, I have been doing this work for a long time. I have sat across from many people in this room and I have watched many of them make the calculation you are making right now, which is to decide how much to say and how much to hold back. A pause. I want you to understand something before you decide. I am not here to negotiate with you. I am not here to reach an agreement that is comfortable for everyone. I am here because a 7-year-old child in your care has bruising documented by a Muggle doctor on 2 separate visits that the doctor herself noted was inconsistent with the stated cause of falling, and because that same child is significantly malnourished, and because he sleeps or recently slept in a cupboard. Her voice remained perfectly even through all of this. The question of what happens to you now depends much less on what you say in this room than you probably think it does. The evidence I have is the evidence I have. What I'm offering you is the opportunity to speak. Vernon had gone quite pale. His large hands were flat on the table in front of him, the way a man lays his hands flat when he doesn't trust what they might do otherwise. He was breathing through his nose. He looked, she thought, like a man who had spent years believing that a particular door was safely locked and had just been told, without drama, that she had a copy of the key. He's not like other children, Vernon said. There was something almost involuntary in it, like a pressure that had been building for a long time finding a crack. You don't know what it's like. He does things. Freakish things, he can't control it, things happen around him, things go wrong. Dudley's friends were frightened of him, the neighbors. He's 7 years old, Amelia said. He's not normal, he is a magical child. Her voice, for the first time, acquired an edge. It was not a raised voice. It was simply a voice that had been, until this moment, held in careful restraint, and now contained within it the suggestion that the restraint was voluntary. His magic is innate. It is part of who he is. It is not freakish. It is not wrong. It is not something that justifies or explains or contextualizes what I have read in this file, and I would strongly recommend that you not attempt to use it as though it does. Vernon closed his mouth. The bruising, Amelia said. The second visit. August, 4 years ago. The doctor described a pattern across his upper back and left shoulder. She wrote that it was inconsistent with a fall. She asked your wife, who had brought him in, to describe the fall again. Your wife described it again. The doctor wrote her second account verbatim and noted that it differed from the first in 3 specific details. Amelia turned the page. What happened in August 4 years ago, Mr. Dursley? The question sat in the room. Vernon's face was doing something complex and ugly. He looked, Amelia thought, like a man who had never in his life been required to look at himself from outside. He broke something, Vernon said. One of Petunia's things. He knocked it off the shelf. He was always underfoot, always. What did you use? Silence. Mr. Dursley. My hand, Vernon said. And then, with a kind of desperate rehabilitation, I didn't, it wasn't, I smacked him, it wasn't, I didn't harm him, it was discipline. You hit a 3-year-old hard enough that the bruising was visible and documented by a medical professional 4 days later, Amelia said. She said it the way she said everything, without theater, without raised voice, without the ornament of shock. The plainness of it was more devastating than anger would have been. That is what you've just told me. I want to make sure we both understand what is on the table. She closed the folder. She placed her hands on it. She looked at Vernon Dursley across the table, and Vernon Dursley looked back at her and for the first time understood, in the concrete and physical way that people only understand things when they are in a room with someone who has real power over them, that this was not going to be manageable. That he could not explain his way out of this room. That this woman across the table, with her folder and her level voice and her monocle on its chain, was not looking for an agreement. She had already decided what had happened. She was here to let him speak because that was the law, and she believed in the law, and it had nothing to do with kindness. What? Vernon's voice was not steady. What is going to happen? Harry Potter will be removed from your custody today, Amelia said. A temporary protective removal order has already been signed by myself and by the senior legal counsel of the department. It took effect at 6:30 this morning. She reached into her folder and placed a copy of the order on the table between them. Custody will be transferred to the Ministry's Magical Child Welfare Division pending a full review. You and your wife will be subject to a formal investigation under the Magical Child Protection Statutes of 1948, as well as the applicable Muggle laws, which this department cooperates with on cases of this kind. She paused. I want to be very clear with you about something, Mr. Dursley. The fact that Harry Potter is a well-known figure in our world, the fact that there are political and historical circumstances surrounding him, none of that is a factor in this room. What is a factor is that a child was in your care, and what I have in this folder is what I have in this folder. Are we clear? Vernon said something that wasn't quite a word. Are we clear, Mr. Dursley? Yes, Vernon said. His voice sounded hollowed out. Amelia stood. She picked up her folder. She was already thinking about the next 4 things she needed to do: the warrant for Privet Drive, the notification to Magical Child Welfare, the owl she needed to send before anyone else sent one first, the specific, careful wording of the memo that was going to Dumbledore's office. She was thinking 4 moves ahead, the way she always thought, and the room was already receding in her attention because the room was done. She was halfway to the door when Vernon spoke. He's the boy who, he stopped himself. She paused with her hand on the door. She didn't turn around. He's that boy, Vernon said. The famous one. The one who, the whole thing, with you-know-who, years ago. He's that boy. Yes, Amelia said. And nobody, in 6 years, nobody from your lot ever came to check. Nobody asked. Nobody came by. We had him, and nobody. His voice had taken on something strange, not quite anger, not quite grief, something murkier and harder to name. I never asked for him. He was left on our doorstep. Nobody asked us. Nobody told us what to do with him. He just appeared and nobody from your world wanted to know. Amelia was quiet for a moment. She turned around, not because she had softened, but because she was honest with herself about the truth in what he'd said, and dishonesty was not something she was capable of, even when honesty was inconvenient. You are correct, she said, that the system failed Harry Potter in multiple ways, and that you were placed in a situation that was handled poorly and with insufficient support. She met his eyes. You are not correct that this excuses what I found in that file. The two things are both true at the same time. His hardship does not cancel yours, and yours does not cancel his. She paused. But in this room, at this moment, I am here for him. That is my job. Someone being here for him is, unfortunately, very overdue. She left. She pulled the door closed behind her, and in the corridor outside she stood for 2 seconds with her eyes shut, doing what she did after the difficult rooms, which was nothing dramatic or visible, just a brief interior stillness, a kind of reseating of herself. Then she walked. 2 hours later she had done more paperwork than most people did in a week. The warrant for number 4 Privet Drive was signed. 2 Aurors, Dawlish and a younger one named Proudfoot, had been dispatched with the removal order. Amelia had given them their instructions with the specificity she always used. The boy was to be collected with his belongings, such as they were, with minimal disruption to the Muggle neighbors, and he was to be told the truth in plain, calm language, which was that someone from the ministry had reviewed his situation and that he was going to be taken somewhere safe. Not you're being rescued, not you've been mistreated, not anything loaded or dramatic. Plain. Calm. Safe. She'd sent the owl to Dumbledore's office. The owl that said, in 4 short sentences, that a temporary protective removal order had been issued for Harry Potter, that he was being removed from Privet Drive today, that his wardship was now under ministry review, and that she was available for a meeting at his earliest convenience. The language was scrupulously professional. The subtext was, she hoped, unmistakable: this is not a consultation. This has already happened. Griselda had appeared in her doorway at 10:30 with 2 cups of actual hot tea and had said, without preamble, the Magical Child Welfare Division is going to want to place him with an approved wizarding family. I know. The approved family list is short and the vetting process is 6 to 8 weeks. I know that too. Amelia accepted the tea. He'll stay with me in the interim. Griselda raised one eyebrow about a millimeter. For Griselda, this was the equivalent of a standing ovation. My home is warded, Amelia said, a little more defensively than she intended. I have adequate space. Susan is there already, she's on school holiday this week. And it is considerably simpler than explaining to the Child Welfare Division why their intake center is appropriate for the most famous magical child in Britain while his case is under active DMLE investigation. She drank her tea. It is purely logistical. Entirely, Griselda said, without inflection. I mean it. I don't doubt you. Griselda leaned in the doorway. Amelia. What you're doing today, this is going to create a great deal of noise. Good noise or bad noise? Both. Griselda looked at her steadily. Dumbledore is not going to receive that owl well. No. He's going to tell you it was necessary. He's going to tell you about the blood wards, about the protection, about his reasons. I expect he will. And you're going to tell him, I'm going to tell him that his reasons were his to make, and the law is mine to enforce, and that those two things are not in conflict because neither of us has any intention of leaving Harry Potter unprotected. She set her cup down. And then I'm going to look at the observation charm logs from 1981 to present and I'm going to find every instance where someone in this department should have caught this sooner, and I'm going to make sure that never happens to another child. She paused. And then I'm going to look at the Sirius Black file, because I realized this morning, while I was filling out the removal paperwork, that I have never actually seen a record of his trial. Griselda went very still. I went to look for it, Amelia said. Last month, for something else. Routine cross-reference. There was no trial date in the file. No hearing record. No Wiesengemot proceedings. She looked at Griselda. I was going to look into it when I had time. I haven't had time. A pause. I'm going to make time. Griselda was quiet for a moment. That's a separate investigation. It may not be entirely separate. Amelia's voice was thoughtful, the way it got when she was assembling something, fitting pieces together by feel. Harry Potter ends up at Privet Drive because Dumbledore places him there. Dumbledore places him there because Peter Pettigrew, allegedly, betrayed the Potters to Voldemort, and then Sirius Black, allegedly, killed Pettigrew and 12 Muggles. Black goes to Azkaban. Harry goes to the Dursleys. It's one sequence. She looked at Griselda. If any part of that sequence is wrong, Amelia. Griselda's voice was careful. One thing at a time. I know. She picked her quill back up. I am doing one thing at a time. I'm very good at it. She looked at the stack of parchment on her desk. First the boy. The memo from Dawlish arrived just before noon. Subject collected. Healthy but undersized. Some difficulty with departure, subject initially uncooperative, did not wish to leave without understanding where he was going. Explained as instructed. Subject asked 3 questions, where are we going, will I have to come back, and can I bring my things? Answered yes, no, and yes respectively. Subject collected 1 school bag and 1 broken toy car. No other personal belongings of note. Arriving at Ministry in approximately 40 minutes. P. Dawlish. Amelia read the memo twice. She put it down. She went to her window and stood looking at the London skyline for a moment with something crossing her face that she wouldn't have been able to name precisely and that she wouldn't have wanted to name in front of anyone. Then she straightened her robes, put her monocle in her pocket, and went down to the visitor reception to wait. She had not told Vernon Dursley, when she'd listed the things that were going to happen, the most important thing that was going to happen, which was that she was going to stand in the Ministry of Magic's visitor reception at noon on a Tuesday, in August, and wait for a 7-year-old boy with a school bag and a broken toy car, and that she was going to look at him and try to figure out, from the shape of him, what he'd been carrying and whether he had any idea that he was allowed to put it down. She stood in the reception area with her hands clasped behind her back and her expression perfectly composed. A wizard in red robes walked past and nodded to her. She nodded back. A witch with a large owl cage squeezed through the far door. The lift opened. Dawlish came out first, which was the protocol. Proudfoot came out second, which was also protocol. Between them, slightly behind and slightly to the left, not being held, she noticed, just walking alongside them, was the smallest 7-year-old Amelia Bones had seen outside of a hospital wing. He was thin in a way that the medical file had described, but that description hadn't prepared her for. His jeans were too large and had been gathered at the waist with what looked like a piece of string. His t-shirt was large enough to be a nightshirt. His hair was dark and completely untamable, sticking in approximately 11 directions, and he wore glasses that were held together at the bridge with what appeared to be sellotape. His eyes, behind the glasses, were very green and very alert and were scanning the atrium in the particular way that children who were watchful scan new spaces, not with curiosity first, but with assessment. Looking for exits. Looking for what was safe to touch. When he saw her looking at him, he didn't look away. He looked back. Direct and measuring. She walked toward them. She stopped in front of him. "Harry," she said. "My name is Amelia Bones. I'm the one who sent for you." He looked at her. He had the school bag on his shoulder and his hands in his pockets and his chin up, which she thought was a thing he'd learned. The chin up. "The officers said I wasn't going back," he said. His voice was clear and slightly cautious. "Is that true?" "Yes," she said. "That's true." He absorbed this. He didn't look relieved, not yet, not obviously. He looked like someone who has been told something good before and knows that good things sometimes turn out to have conditions on them. Where am I going? With me, for now. I have a home with a spare bedroom and a niece who I suspect will want to talk to you at extremely high volume very shortly after you arrive. She watched him. Her name is Susan. She's your age. He looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded, once, short and decisive, and said, "Okay." Amelia Bones was not a sentimental woman and she was not overwhelmed by this moment. She noted it, filed it, felt it settle somewhere with weight. A 7-year-old boy with a broken toy car and a school bag and sellotaped glasses and a chin held up by pure stubbornness, standing in the ministry atrium and saying okay with that careful, provisional trust, like he was granting it on a trial basis and she should know it could be revoked. She thought, "You have no idea what's coming for you, Harry Potter. You have no idea what's about to change." Out loud she said, "Come on then," and turned toward the lift. He fell into step beside her, not behind her. She noticed that too. Chapter 2, The Boy Who Didn't Ask for Things. The Bones house was in Wiltshire, which Harry learned from the car ride, except it wasn't quite a car ride because the car didn't drive in any direction that made sense. Amelia Bones said, "Hold on," in the same tone she probably used to say, "Pass the salt," and then the world folded itself in half and came back the other way, and Harry's stomach arrived about 3 seconds after the rest of him did. "Apparition," Amelia said, before he could ask. "Side along. You'll get used to it." Harry stood on the gravel path outside a house that was neither enormous nor small, with roses that had gone slightly wild on the left side and a garden wall with moss on the top stones. It was the kind of house that had been lived in for a long time and didn't feel any need to apologize for it. There were lights on inside. The front door was red. He had been in the Dursleys' house his entire life. He had been in his primary school and the corner shop and the park near Privet Drive. That was, more or less, the complete inventory of places Harry Potter had been. He looked at the house. He looked at the overgrown roses and the moss and the warm light behind the windows. He said nothing, because Harry had learned young that saying things about what he noticed usually led to some consequence he hadn't anticipated, and it was better to wait and see. "Your room is on the first floor," Amelia said. She was already walking up the path. "End of the corridor. Susan has the room next to it, she'll tell you that herself at length. Bathroom is between them. I'll show you where things are." Harry followed her up the path. At the door she pressed her hand flat against the wood for a moment, some kind of charm, he guessed, feeling the faint tingle of it even from a step below her, and the door swung open. The hallway inside smelled like old wood and something baking. There was a coat rack with too many coats on it. A large black cat sat at the foot of the stairs and looked at Harry with the profound indifference that only cats achieve, then turned and walked away. "That's Thatcher," Amelia said. "She doesn't like anyone for the first week. Don't take it personally." "Okay," Harry said. The kitchen was at the end of the hall, large, slightly cluttered, with a fireplace that had a kettle already hanging over it. And at the kitchen table, eating what appeared to be an extremely large piece of toast with both hands, was a girl with red gold hair and round cheeks and the expression of someone who had been waiting for something to happen and was genuinely delighted that it finally had. She looked at Harry. He looked at her. "You're Harry Potter," she said. There was toast in her mouth. "Yeah," he said. "I'm Susan." She swallowed the toast. "Aunt Amelia said you might be coming." She didn't say for certain, she said possibly, but I could tell from how she said it that she meant yes. She looked at him with frank appraisal that Harry found, unexpectedly, more comfortable than the careful watching he was used to. "You're smaller than I thought you'd be." "Susan," Amelia said. "What?" "He is. That is not the thing we open with." Susan considered this briefly and arrived at the obvious conclusion that she disagreed. "Are you hungry?" she asked Harry. "There's loads of toast." Mrs. Hartley, she helps Aunt Amelia on weekdays. She made bread this morning, so it's the good bread, not the square kind. Harry had eaten a bowl of cereal at 6:30 that morning, the tail end of the box that Dudley hadn't wanted, dry because Dudley had had the last of the milk. He was, as a clinical matter of biological fact, very hungry. "I'm fine," he said. Susan looked at him. She had bright brown eyes and a directness in them that reminded him, oddly, of Amelia Bones herself, though Susan deployed it without the weight of authority behind it, which made it feel different. "Okay," she said, in a tone that clearly meant "I don't believe you, but I won't push it right now." She pushed the plate of toast toward the center of the table. "I'll just leave these here." Amelia was at the kettle. She said, without turning around, "Sit down, Harry." He sat down. He put his school bag on the floor next to his feet. He put his hands in his lap. He looked at the toast and didn't reach for it. "Help yourself," Amelia said. She said it plainly, not pointedly. Not "Go on, aren't you going to eat?" Not "Why aren't you eating?" Just the information, delivered once, and left alone. Harry reached out and took a piece of toast. He ate it carefully. Then he took another. Susan watched him without watching him, which he would later come to recognize as something she was very good at. She talked instead, about the house, about Thatcher the cat and her annoying habits, about the garden which apparently had a frog problem, about her school friend Hannah who had written her a letter just yesterday with news about what everyone was doing over the summer. She talked in the easy, rolling way of someone who had grown up in a house where conversation was normal and not something that needed to be earned, and Harry found himself listening with a kind of hungry attention that had nothing to do with the toast. He ate 4 pieces. He kept waiting for someone to say something about it. Nobody did. Amelia showed him his room before lunch. The room had a window that looked out over the garden. There was a bed with a blue cover, a wardrobe with actual space in it, a desk, and a bookshelf that was half empty and clearly waiting. The walls were plain. The floor had a rug. It was not a grand room or an elaborate one, but every single thing in it was for him and not accidentally left over from something else. He stood in the doorway looking at it. "The wardrobe's empty," Amelia said. "We'll get you clothes tomorrow. There's a drawer in the desk for your things." A pause. "Is there anything you need that you don't have?" He didn't know how to answer that question. He had been composing lists in his head, internally and without much hope, since he was about 4. Lists of things he'd seen at school or at shops that he would never ask for because asking led to nothing good. Books. A torch of his own so he could read under the covers. Trainers that actually fit. He'd had the list in his head for so long that the question she was asking, "Is there anything you need?" made it difficult to find a surface to stand on. "I'm fine," he said. She made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite agreement. She stepped past him into the room, to the desk, and opened the top drawer. Inside was a small torch with fresh batteries in it. She didn't say anything about it. She just slid the drawer closed and stepped back out. Harry stared at the closed drawer. "Lunch is at 1, Amelia said. Susan will come get you. If you want to explore the garden before then, the back gate is unlocked. Mind the frogs." She left. Harry stood in the doorway of his room for another minute. Then he went inside, sat on the edge of the bed, and tested the mattress with his hands in the way you test a thing you haven't decided to trust yet. It was soft. He lay back on it slowly, like he was waiting for someone to object. Nobody objected. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about Vernon in some room in the ministry. He thought about Petunia in the kitchen at Privet Drive right now, not knowing what to do with the silence. He thought about Dudley and his 2 bedrooms full of broken toys. He thought about these things and waited to feel something about them. What he mostly felt was the mattress under his back and the ceiling above him, which was white and unstained, and the quiet of the house, which was a different kind of quiet than the quiet of the cupboard under the stairs. He pulled the school bag up beside him and unzipped it. Inside was a maths textbook, 3 pencils, a broken red toy car, and a crumpled piece of paper which was a test he'd gotten full marks on in May and had kept because no one at Privet Drive had cared about it and he'd thought he might want to look at it again sometime. He smoothed the test paper out on his chest and read it upside down. 12 out of 12. Mrs. Collins had written excellent work, Harry. At the top in red pen. He folded it back up and put it in the desk drawer, next to the torch. Susan came to get him at 5 to 1, as advertised. She knocked on the door, which was a thing Harry added to the list of things that were different here, because nobody had ever knocked on the cupboard door, they just opened it or banged on it from outside. "Lunch," she said. Mrs. Hartley made soup. "It's really good," she puts dill in it. She looked at him. "Do you like dill?" "I don't know what dill is," Harry said honestly. Susan considered this. "It's like a herb. Sort of grassy but in a good way. You'll like it." She said this with the confidence of someone who had never once been wrong about soup. Lunch was soup with bread and butter, and a plate of cold chicken that appeared midway through. Harry ate with the methodical focus of someone making sure they were keeping pace but not drawing attention, and Susan talked and Amelia asked Harry occasional questions, not interrogation style, just the ordinary questions of a person at a table with someone new. What year was he in at school? What was his best subject? Had he read much over the summer? He answered, second year going on third, maths, and no because there weren't many books at Privet Drive. "There's a bookshelf in your room," Amelia said. "I know. It was empty. We'll fill it." She said it the way she said everything, as a matter of fact, and moved on to the next thing. "This week is relatively quiet. Susan has the last week of her holiday, and I'll be in the ministry most days but I'll be home by 6. Mrs. Hartley is here until 4. If you need anything while I'm at work, she's here, and there's a FLU connection in the study if you need to reach me directly." Harry nodded. He was learning that Amelia Bones communicated in information. That she didn't layer her statements with expectation or subtext the way the Dursleys did, where every sentence had another sentence hiding underneath it. She said what she meant and meant what she said and didn't apparently require him to decode either of those things. It was, he thought, extremely restful. "What's FLU?" he asked. Susan looked genuinely shocked. "You don't know what the FLU is?" "Susan," Amelia said, mildly. Sorry, she recovered. "It's a way of communicating through fireplaces. Or traveling. You stick your head in and then you can talk to whoever you want if they have a connected fireplace." Harry thought about this. He thought about the word magic and what it meant that he was, apparently, magic. He thought about his whole life through that lens and found that it reordered quite a lot of things. Things he'd dismissed as accidents or imagination. "I've done things," he said, carefully. "Before. Without meaning to. Things that happened. Around me." "Accidental magic," Amelia said. "Yes. That's what flagged your file." He looked at her. That's how you found out." "That's how I found the file," she said. She was direct about it, matter of fact, not dancing around it. "Your magic triggered a ministry monitoring charm. The report came to my office." She paused, briefly. "What I found in the file is what I acted on." Harry was quiet for a moment. "What did you find?" Susan had gone still. She was watching Amelia. "A welfare review," Amelia said, steady and even. "Medical records. Some things that needed looking at." She met his eyes across the table. "The short version, if you want it, is that you should have been found sooner. That is something I intend to make sure doesn't happen to other children. But it did happen, and I'm sorry that it did." Harry processed this. He had never, in his life, had an adult look him in the eye and say I'm sorry to him about something that wasn't their fault. Not about something that was actually about him. he didn't know where to put it. He turned back to his soup and found a piece of bread to pull apart. "Okay," he said. It was the same okay as before. Provisional. Trial basis. He didn't know yet if he trusted it, but he was giving it a chance. Susan, who had been watching this whole exchange with the silent, careful attention of someone far more emotionally intelligent than her age suggested she should be, picked up her spoon and said, "After lunch I'll show you the frog situation. There are 4 of them and I've named them. Aunt Amelia says I can't keep them inside, but I think that's negotiable." "It isn't," Amelia said. "I think it is," Susan said pleasantly. Harry, for the first time since this morning, felt something in his chest shift loose. Not much. Just a little. Like a knot that had been there so long he'd forgotten it was a knot and not just part of him, and now someone had found the end of it without pulling hard. The afternoon was frogs and garden and an argument about whether Trevor, Susan's name for the largest frog, borrowed from a book, was more of a Trevor or more of a Gerald. Harry voted Gerald on the grounds that he looked like he'd lived a complicated life. Susan said that wasn't a reason. Harry said it absolutely was. Susan laughed, which was a short bright sound, and said that was the best reason she'd ever heard. This was the first argument Harry Potter had ever had with anyone where he'd finished it without his stomach hurting. They sat on the back steps in the late afternoon sun and Susan told him about Hogwarts, which he'd heard of in the same vague way he'd heard of magic, as a word that existed somewhere outside his life, connected to the world his parents had apparently belonged to. She told him about the 4 houses and the subjects and the moving staircases and the ghosts, and Harry listened with the voracious attention of someone hearing about a place they are going to need to understand. She told him about her first year, which had just ended. About Transfiguration and how Professor McGonagall could turn into a cat, which Harry found both completely alarming and extremely brilliant. About the library, which she said was the best thing about the whole school. "Can anyone go?" Harry asked. "To the library?" "Course. There are restricted sections, but those are just for, you know, dark art stuff, advanced spell work. The general library is enormous. You'd love it." She looked at him sideways. "You like reading?" "Yeah." He paused. There weren't a lot of books." She accepted this without comment, which he was already learning was something she did, took information in without making it into a bigger thing than it was. "You can borrow mine," she said. "I've got the Hogwarts, a history back inside and about 40 others. And Aunt Amelia's study has basically a whole library in it, but she'll want to know which ones you're borrowing." "Is she strict about her books?" Susan thought about it. "She's strict about everything, but she's fair about it. Like she doesn't just say no for no reason. If you ask properly she usually says yes." She picked a piece of grass and tore it down the middle. "She was like that with my parents too." Her voice shifted slightly, not much, just a fraction in tone. "They died when I was 3. Voldemort's people. Aunt Amelia's she's all I've got." Harry looked at her. "My parents too," he said. "I know." She looked back at him steadily. "I know who you are. I knew from the start. But you're not, I mean you're Harry, but you're also just." She gestured vaguely. "You're just here." He understood what she meant. She was telling him that she knew the famous part and didn't particularly care about it. That he could be both things, Harry Potter the famous name, and Harry the person eating toast at her kitchen table. He hadn't known that was possible before today. He looked out at the garden. "Gerald is watching us," he said. The large frog was indeed sitting on the 3rd stone of the path, looking at them with bulbous yellow eyes. "He does that," Susan said. "I think he's lonely." "Frogs aren't lonely. You don't know that." "I'm pretty sure, you don't know though," she said firmly, and Harry shut his mouth over a grin that surprised him by existing at all. Amelia came home at 6:15 with the look of someone who had fought through a day and won and found winning more exhausting than losing would have been. She came into the kitchen, removed her outer robe, hung it on the hook by the door, and put the kettle on without speaking. Harry and Susan were at the kitchen table. Harry was reading the copy of Hogwarts, a history that Susan had retrieved at high speed and presented to him like an offering. He'd been reading for an hour and had stopped noticing the world. Amelia looked at him reading, and something in her face did a thing she probably didn't intend to show. "Dinner in an hour," she said. "How was the afternoon?" "We named the frogs," Susan said. "I heard there was an argument about a frog called Gerald." Susan stared. "How did you know that already?" "Mrs. Hartley," Amelia said. She was inside though. The kitchen window was open. Susan made a noise of profound injustice. Amelia poured her tea and looked at Harry over the rim of the cup. "How are you doing?" she asked. Not "are you all right," which was a question that required fine as its answer regardless of truth. "How are you doing?" A real question. He looked up from the book. He thought about it genuinely for a second. In the way he'd learned today, he was apparently allowed to. "Okay," he said. "The book is really good." Amelia smiled. It was not an enormous smile, not the wide beaming sort, but it reached her eyes and was completely real. "Susan's copy," she said. "But if you want your own, I'll get you one." She said it simply, as though buying a book was not an extravagance requiring justification, and Harry managed, this time, to say, "Yes please," instead of "I'm fine," which cost him more than she probably knew. "Good." She sat down at the table with her tea. She had a day's worth of weight in her posture that Harry noticed the way he noticed everything, cataloguing it, but she wasn't taking it out on the room. She just carried it. "I need to ask you something," she said. "It's going to feel like a lot of questions, but I'll be quick and you can tell me if you don't want to answer something." Harry put the book down. "Okay. Your parents had friends," she said. "People who were close to them. I want to make sure we're being thorough about your situation, about who might have a claim to guardianship, who you might want us to look into. Does anyone ever contact you? Come by? Write letters?" "No," Harry said. "No one at all." "No." He said it plainly, without the hurt of it in his voice, because he'd had the hurt of it for long enough that it had worn smooth. "My aunt said I didn't have any family. Anyone who mattered. She said they were all," she used the word dangerous. "The people who were friends with my parents." Amelia was quiet for a moment. "She said that. When I asked about them. I asked once, when I was 5. She didn't like the question." He paused. "I didn't ask again." Susan was watching him from across the table, not trying to hide it. Her face had the expression of someone feeling something on someone else's behalf, not pity. She wasn't doing pity, he could feel the difference, but something more like recognition. Like she understood the particular shape of a question you'd stopped asking. "I see," Amelia said. She filed something, not in a folder, but internally. He could see her doing it, adding information to a sequence. "All right. Did you ever hear the name Sirius Black?" Harry thought about it. "The killer," he said. "We did a project at school on famous criminals. He was one of them. My teacher said," he stopped. He looked at Amelia. "He's the one who betrayed my parents." Amelia was quiet for one very specific second. "That's what is generally believed, yes," she said. "I'm looking into his case." "Why?" "Because I like to be thorough," she said. She didn't say because I think he might be innocent. Harry was 7 and she was not going to turn his world over twice in one day. She said thorough, which was true. She was thorough. She was going to be thorough about Sirius Black in the same way she was thorough about everything, until she had pulled every thread and the thing she had left was the actual truth rather than the assumed version of it. Harry looked at her steadily. He knew she was giving him the real answer but not the whole answer. He stored the difference and let it go for now, because he was 7 and tired and there was soup again for dinner and he'd been reading an extremely good book and sometimes even Harry Potter, with his cataloguing mind and his watchful eyes, was allowed to have one day where he absorbed the first half of the truth and saved the rest for when he was ready. "There's something else," Amelia said. She said it carefully. "It's about today. About this morning. About Vernon Dursley." He looked at her. "He was in this office this morning," she said. There are legal proceedings now. I want you to know that." She paused. "I also want you to know that you don't have to have any contact with him. With either of them. At all. If that's what you want." Harry thought about Vernon. He thought about the specific sound Vernon's voice made when it went from loud to the particular soft that was worse than loud, and he thought about the cupboard door with the lock on the outside, and he thought about breakfast made for 3 and a bowl of cereal for 1. He thought about a lot of things in the space of a second in the way he could, quickly, filing and assessing and finding the bottom of them. "That's what I want," he said. "Then that's what happens. No qualification. No we'll see or it may be more complicated. That's what happens." He picked his book back up. Susan leaned over and pointed at the chapter on the Great Hall. "That bit's really good," she said, tapping the page. "Read that bit." He read that bit. Dinner was lamb chops and potatoes and peas and a bread roll each. Harry ate everything on his plate and the question of seconds sat in the air for a moment. He looked at the serving dish with the automatic reflex of someone who knew better than to help themselves, and Susan said, "Go on, there's loads left," in the easy natural way of someone who genuinely just meant it, no trap in it, no test, and he served himself more potatoes, which tasted like ordinary potatoes but somehow also like something else, something that took him a while to identify. He identified it after dinner, when he was back in his room. He was sitting at the desk with the torch from the drawer, reading his book, when he realized that the potatoes had tasted like being allowed to want them. He read until 11, which he'd never done before because he'd never had a torch of his own and he'd never had a room with a door that closed properly and no one who might open it. He read until his eyes hurt and then he put the torch down and lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling. He thought about what came next. He was practical in the way that children who've managed themselves become practical. He thought in specific steps. There would be more questions. There would be people making decisions about where he went and who had him. He didn't know what happened now, he knew very little about how wizarding law worked, or really how any of this worked. He knew Amelia Bones had pulled him out of Privet Drive, and that she was thorough, and that she'd looked him in the eye and answered his questions directly, and that there was a torch in his drawer, and bread with dill in the soup. He'd been trained by 7 years of carefulness to not rely on things. To not trust good runs. He knew that. But he was also tired. And the mattress was soft. And downstairs there was a woman who had stood in the ministry atrium and looked at him like he was a person and said come on then like it was the most ordinary, straightforward thing in the world. He thought, I'll give it a chance. He slept better than he had in 7 years, which wasn't saying nothing. At 8 the next morning he came downstairs to find the kitchen table set for breakfast. Susan was already there, pouring orange juice with a precision that suggested she took it seriously. Amelia was at the far end of the table reading a ministry memo that she set aside when Harry came in. There was toast, and eggs, and a small bowl of fruit, and his spot at the table had been set the same as everyone else's. He sat down. He reached for the toast. Nobody watched him do it. He thought, quietly and to himself, about how it was possible for the same action, taking a piece of bread, to be completely different depending on whether anyone was counting. He filed this away. It felt important for reasons he couldn't quite articulate yet and suspected he would understand better when he was older. I'm going to the ministry at 9, Amelia said. She was looking at her memo again. I have meetings all morning. Susan, you have that letter to write to your grandmother. I know, Susan said, in the tone of someone for whom grandmothers were not the highest priority. Harry. Amelia looked at him over the memo. I'm going to have someone come this afternoon. From the ministry's Child Welfare Division, a witch named Pomfrey, not the same one from Hogwarts, different one, to do a standard welfare assessment. It's a required step in the formal process. She'll ask you some questions and she'll look around. It's routine. She paused. Is there anything you want to ask me before that happens? He thought about it. He had 100 questions, but he picked the most pressing one, the one that sat underneath all the others. What happens at the end of it? He asked. The assessment, and all the legal stuff. What happens at the end? Amelia Bones put the memo down and gave him her full attention. The end goal, she said, is finding you a permanent placement. That means a home. A proper one, in the wizarding world, with people who are suited to it and properly vetted. She paused. It won't be fast. These things take time to do properly. But I don't intend to rush it and get it wrong, and in the meantime you are here, and this is a safe place. She held his gaze. I know that's a lot of uncertainty. I know you've had a great deal of uncertainty. Yeah, he said. I'm sorry for that. He nodded. He picked up his toast. He looked at Susan, who was already deep in argument with a jar of marmalade whose lid was being uncooperative, muttering at it. Susan, Amelia said, without looking up from her memo. The marmalade lid came off with a pop. Susan looked triumphant. Harry ate his breakfast. He thought, in the back of his mind, about permanence and what it felt like as a concept. He had never really thought about it before because it hadn't been something that applied to him. Home had meant Privet Drive, which was a place he lived in the way the Dursleys' spare winter coats lived in the hallway, present and stored and not exactly wanted. The idea of a home that was a real home, a permanent one, chosen, in a world where his magic was not a problem but a part of him, it sat in his chest like the torch in the drawer. Small and specific and not very showy about what it meant. He reached for the marmalade jar and Susan passed it without being asked, which was how people at ordinary tables ate breakfast together, and Harry Potter, who had never once eaten at an ordinary table, filed this carefully into the same place he kept the torch and the mattress and the name Gerald and the taste of potatoes, and went on eating. Chapter 3, The thread that pulls the Sirius Black file was not where it was supposed to be. Amelia found this out on Wednesday morning, which was technically her third morning of working two separate investigations simultaneously, which was not unusual for her except that one of them involved a 7-year-old boy currently eating toast in her kitchen and the other one was starting to look like something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up in the specific way it did when she pulled a loose thread and felt the whole thing shift. She'd sent for the file on Monday evening. Standard request, routed through the records division, response time of 24 hours on archived criminal cases. Tuesday came and went. No file. She sent a follow-up memo Tuesday afternoon. Wednesday morning she received a reply from the records division that said, in the careful, slightly apologetic language of a bureaucrat who had looked for something and not found it and did not entirely want to say so, the requested case file for Sirius Orion Black, Azkaban prisoner 4892, is currently held in the senior archives under ministerial seal. Access requires sign-off from the Department of Magical Corrections or the Minister's office. Please resubmit your request with appropriate clearance. Amelia read this memo twice. Then she wrote back, in her own hand, on paper stamped with the head of department seal, I am the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. I have clearance for every file in this ministry above the level of classified, including materials under ministerial seal, on matters that fall within my departmental remit. The incarceration of a criminal convicted of murder falls within my departmental remit. You have until noon today to produce the file or I will come down to the senior archives myself and retrieve it in person, at which point your supervisor will be receiving a separate memo from me. She got the file at 11:47. It was thin. That was the first thing. For a man convicted of killing 13 people, 12 muggles and 1 wizard, Peter Pettigrew, a man who was considered by most of the wizarding world to be Voldemort's most dangerous lieutenant, the file was extraordinarily thin. She opened it on her desk with the particular attentiveness she reserved for things that were about to be worse than she'd expected. The arrest record was there. October 1, 1981, 2 days after the Potters had been killed. Sirius Black had been taken into custody by 3 Aurors in a street in Muggle London. The crime scene report described the blast marks, the crater, the body parts of 12 Muggles that couldn't be individually identified, and 1 finger, a single finger, that was apparently all that had been recovered of Peter Pettigrew. The report noted that the wand recovered from the scene was Sirius Black's, that several witnesses had seen him laughing in the street immediately after the explosion, that he had offered no resistance to arrest. She turned the page. The next page was the Azkaban intake form. Dated November 3, 1981. His name. His prisoner number. His sentence, life. She turned the page. The next page was blank. She turned it. Also blank. She fanned through the remaining pages of the file. They were all blank. She went back to the beginning. Arrest record, intake form, blank, blank, blank. She laid the whole thing flat on her desk and looked at it with the expression of a woman who has found precisely what she was afraid she was going to find. There was no trial. No Wisengamot proceedings. No hearing date. No evidence submission. No list of charges formally put. No verdict, because there had been no trial at which a verdict could be delivered. No record of a solicitor being appointed or waived. No record of Black being asked whether he wanted to speak on his own behalf. No record of him being informed of any rights under the Wizarding Criminal Code. Sirius Black had been arrested on the 1st of October, 1981, and transferred to Azkaban on the 3rd of November, 1981, and nothing at all had happened in between those 2 dates except that someone had filled in a prisoner number and sent him to the most miserable place in the world. Amelia stood up. She walked to her window. She stood there for approximately 90 seconds, which was twice as long as her usual window standing, and she looked at the street below where people were going about their ordinary day, and she thought about a lot of things at once with the clarity of someone whose mind worked fastest under the pressure of genuine outrage. She thought about the year 1981. She thought about the shape of that year, Voldemort falling, the wizarding world in chaos and grief and euphoria, the ministry in disarray, Bartemius Crouch Sr. as head of the DMLE. She thought about Crouch, who had been known for his absolute refusal to tolerate anything associated with Voldemort, who had authorized the use of unforgivables against Death Eaters, who had sent people to Azkaban with, she now understood, what was apparently a level of informality she had not fully appreciated at the time. She thought about a man in Azkaban for 6 years who had never been tried. She thought about Harry Potter asleep in her spare bedroom, or not asleep, probably, he'd have been up at 6 reading that book, and she thought about how Harry was at the Dursleys because his parents were dead, and his parents were dead because Voldemort found them, and Voldemort found them because someone told him where to look. The file said that someone was Sirius Black. But the file was 30 pages of nothing, and the thing about nothing was that it wasn't evidence. It was just absence. And absence, in Amelia Bones's experience, was not the same as innocence confirmed or guilt established. Absence was someone not doing their job. She turned around. She picked up her quill. She wrote 3 memos simultaneously, which she was capable of because she'd been doing this for 15 years. The first went to Crouch's former deputy, now retired to the Hebrides, asking for any recollection of the circumstances of Black's arrest and transfer. The second went to the Azkaban administration, requesting a current status report on prisoner 4892 including his mental state and any requests he had made over the 6 years of his imprisonment. The third went to Griselda Marchbanks, which said, "I need an hour of your time today. Bring the Wizarding Criminal Code. Section 8, Subsection 4. Section 8, Subsection 4 was the provision for emergency Wiesengemot review of cases where due process had not been followed. It had been used twice in the last century. Amelia was now considering making it 3 times. She was halfway through drafting a 4th memo, to a contact in the Horror Evidence Archive about the wand testing from the 1981 scene, when her office door opened. It opened without a knock, which told her who it was before she looked up. Albus Dumbledore stepped into her office. He was wearing deep purple robes and an expression of benign concern that Amelia recognized as the expression he wore when he was not entirely in control of a situation and preferred that this not be visible. He closed the door behind him. He did not sit down, which meant he intended this to be brief. "Amelia," he said. "Good morning." "Albus." She kept writing. "I'll be with you in a moment." She finished the sentence she was on. She set the quill down. She folded her hands on her desk and looked up at him with complete attentiveness, which was a form of respect she gave everyone and which he would therefore not be able to read as either welcome or otherwise. "I received your owl," he said. "Which one?" The corner of his mouth moved. "The one about Harry." "Then you know what I'm going to say." "I know what you've done," he said. He sat down then, settling into the chair across from her with the ease of a man who was not accustomed to being the one seeking an audience. "I'd prefer to understand your intentions before we discuss whether it was the right decision." "The removal order is already in effect," Amelia said. "His custody is under ministry review. Those things are facts, not intentions, and they're not reversible by this conversation." She met his eyes. "If you'd like to understand my thinking, I'm happy to share it." "Please." She opened the medical file. She placed it on the desk in front of him. She watched him pick it up and read it. He read it carefully, which she'd expected. Dumbledore was never careless with information. His face, as he read, did not do very much, which was also something she'd expected, and which told her less than it should have. He set it down. "I was aware that the environment was not ideal," he said. Amelia looked at him. "I want to be clear with you," he said, and his voice carried something she'd rarely heard in it, something that was not quite an apology and not quite a defense and was perhaps the thing between them, which was regret filtered through justification. "I was aware that Petunia Dursley was not a warm woman. I was not aware that the situation had deteriorated to this degree." "The observation charm was on the passive monitor queue," Amelia said. "And had been for 5 years. So you relied on a system that you knew was understaffed and overworked to monitor the welfare of a child you had personally placed in that house." She said it without heat because heat would give him something to respond to. The flatness of it was harder to argue with. "I'm not going to tell you that your reasons were wrong, Albus. I believe you that the blood wards matter. I believe you that the protection is real. But a protection that required this," she touched the file, "as its condition was a protection that should have come with active monitoring. Regular, proper, human monitoring. And it didn't." He was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said. It was so simple and so prompt that it wrong-footed her slightly, which she suspected was partly the point. "What I did was insufficient," he continued. "I made a calculation about what would keep Harry safest in the long term and I didn't give enough weight to what happened to him in the short term. That is a failure I will carry." He paused. "Where is he now?" "With me." "In the short term." She held his gaze. "In the longer term, that's what the welfare review will determine. The blood wards are something I'll want your full explanation of before we make any permanent decisions," she said. "I'm not dismissing them. I'm also not letting them be the reason we return him to a house where he was documented as malnourished." She paused. "Is there a way to replicate the protection through other means?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Possibly," he said. "It would require research. Time. Then we have time. He's safe where he is. My wards are not trivial. She looked at him steadily. I want the full documentation on the blood ward magic on my desk within the week. Every detail. I'll have my curse breakers look at it and we will find an alternative if one exists. He nodded slowly. He looked, she thought, like a man who had come in expecting a fight and found instead someone who had already done his thinking for him and done it more thoroughly. He looked, briefly, something close to tired. He's well, he asked. And she heard the thing in it, the genuine thing, underneath all the layers of strategy and long game and greater good, the care for a specific child that was real even if it had been expressed, catastrophically, through insufficiency. He's reading Hogwarts, a history, she said. He'd eaten approximately nothing before he arrived. He's sleeping in a real bed. A pause. He's a remarkable child, Albus. You know that. He's perceptive and intelligent and he is going to be extraordinary. He's also 7 years old and he flinches when voices get raised, and the first time someone told him to help himself to food he didn't reach for it. She held his gaze. That is what the blood wards cost. The room was quiet. I know, Dumbledore said, and this time there was nothing behind it but what it was. She let the silence stand for a moment. Then she looked down at her desk. I have another matter, she said. I assumed you might. She looked up. Sirius Black. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, it was more complicated than guilt. More like the expression of a man who has been waiting for a specific knock on a specific door for 6 years and has finally heard it. I have his file, she said. I found it this morning. There was no trial, Albus. He said nothing. He was arrested. He was transferred to Azkaban 33 days later. In between, nothing. No hearing, no evidence review, no formal charges, no defense. 6 years ago and nobody noticed because Crouch was running the DMLE and nobody questioned Crouch's procedures until Crouch was no longer running anything. She watched him. Did you know? Another silence. Longer this time. I knew the trial had been expedited, he said, carefully. Expedited and not conducted are different things. Yes. He looked at his hands for a moment, and she had the feeling, rare and slightly arresting, of watching Albus Dumbledore genuinely uncertain how to proceed. At the time, I believed him guilty. The evidence at the scene was, it appeared conclusive. The witnesses, the wand, what was left of Peter, he stopped. I believed him guilty, he said again. I did not look closely at the process because the process seemed, to my eye, to be delivering the correct result. And now, she said. Did you notice that there was no trial? Later, when things settled? He met her eyes. And she saw, in them, the honest thing, the thing she suspected he had been carrying for a long time as an item he had not examined closely because examining it closely would require him to act on it, and acting on it would complicate the sequence of events that he had arranged around Harry's survival with the care of a man setting up a chessboard. Yes, he said. I noticed. And you did nothing. I believed him guilty, he said again. And I told myself that the outcome was just even if the process was not. Amelia sat back in her chair. She looked at him for a long moment with the expression she reserved for exactly this kind of statement, not fury, because fury was too simple for what she felt, but the deep, settled clarity of someone who has found the line and knows with absolute precision where it is. That is not how the law works, she said. That is not how justice works. Not in my department. Not in my world. The outcome is not just if the process is wrong, because a wrong process is how innocent men end up in Azkaban. She paused. And if Sirius Black is innocent, I don't know that he is. No. Neither do I. That's rather the point. She picked up the file. I'm opening a formal review. Emergency Wisengamot Provision, Section 8, Subsection 4. I'm doing it today. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Peter Pettigrew is dead. There is no one to contradict the physical evidence." "I'm aware." She looked at him steadily. "But the question of whether there was evidence sufficient to convict, that question was never asked in a proper forum. I'm going to ask it now." She paused. "And Albus, if at any point during this review I find that you have information relevant to this case that you have not shared with me, I will consider that obstruction. Are we clear on that?" He looked at her for a long moment. He looked, she thought, like a man recalibrating. "Perfectly clear," he said. "Good." She picked up her quill. "I'll need you to give a full account of what you observed on the night of October 31st, 1981, and what you knew of the circumstances of Black's arrest. I'll schedule that for Friday." She wrote a note. "Was there anything else you wanted to discuss this morning?" He stood. He smoothed his robes. He was back to the composed version of himself, the one she was most familiar with, though she thought the composure now sat slightly differently on him than it had when he'd come in. "No," he said. "I think you've covered the ground rather thoroughly." "I usually do," she said. He moved toward the door. Then he stopped, because this was Dumbledore and he was constitutionally incapable of leaving any room without the last word. "He's going to have an extraordinary life," he said. "Harry. Whatever happens now, whatever form it takes, extraordinary." "Yes," Amelia agreed. "I expect he will." She looked down at her parchment. "I'd like for it to also be a good one, if we can manage it." She heard him leave. She sat for a moment in the quiet after the door closed, sorting through the sediment of the conversation. Then she pulled the Sirius Black file back toward her and read it again from the beginning, this time with the slower, methodical attention of someone building a case rather than reacting to one. A single finger. That was all they had of Peter Pettigrew. One finger and the wand of Sirius Black and witnesses who had seen him laughing in the street. She thought about that laugh. What kind of man laughed in the street at a thing like that? She thought about grief, and how grief sometimes looked exactly like the wrong thing, and how 7 years of Azkaban had a way of making the question of innocence much harder to revisit than it would have been the month it happened. She wrote another memo. This one went to the Aura Department's cold case team, to a young woman named Tonks who had just passed her Aura qualifications and had a reputation for finding things that more senior people had stopped looking for. Review all physical evidence from the Black arrest, October 1981. Specifically, wand residue analysis, blast pattern report, body identification procedures for the Pettigrew remains. Looking for anything that was noted and not followed up on. Report directly to me. She sealed it. She sent it. She picked up her tea, which was cold again, and went to the window one more time. Harry was in the garden when she got home that evening, which she had not expected. He was sitting cross-legged on the grass near the back wall, not with a book, just sitting, with the quality of someone who has spent a lot of time alone and is comfortable in it. Gerald the Frog was approximately 2 feet from him, doing nothing in particular. Harry was watching a beetle on the stone of the garden wall with the complete absorption of someone finding a beetle genuinely interesting, which Amelia found, for no reason she could precisely name, quietly wonderful. She stood at the kitchen window and watched for a moment before going out. He had found an old gardening hat somewhere, hanging on the back gate, Mrs. Hartley's from the look of it, and it was on his head at a slight angle, too big for him, and he was apparently unbothered by this. He looked, she thought, like a boy who was beginning to understand that nobody was watching him with the purpose of finding fault. She went outside. He looked up when he heard the door. "The beetle has been doing the same thing for 10 minutes, he said. Going right to the edge of the stone and then coming back. What do you think it's deciding? She asked, sitting down on the back step. He thought about it seriously. Whether to jump, he said. Beetles don't typically struggle with ambition. This one might be different. She smiled. Susan inside? Writing the letter to her grandmother. She's been writing it for 2 hours. I think she's mostly staring at it. That is how Susan writes letters, Amelia confirmed. She overthinks the opening. She should just start in the middle, Harry said. That's what I do at school. Start in the middle of what you want to say and then go back to the beginning once you know what the beginning is. Amelia looked at him. That is excellent advice, she said. Where did you learn that? He shrugged. Figured it out. The teacher used to mark us on the first sentence. I couldn't ever think of a good first sentence, so I'd write everything else first and then work out what the opening should be. How were your marks? Good. He said it without pride, just as information. Top of the class mostly. My uncle didn't like it. He said the last sentence the same way he said the first two, which was in the flat, even tone of someone relaying facts, and Amelia let it sit where he'd put it. She'd learned quickly that Harry didn't want his past poked at, he'd share it when he chose to, on his own timeline, and the worst thing she could do was pick up the thread and tug. The assessment today, she said instead. How was it? Fine. He considered. She asked a lot of questions about the Dursleys. I answered them. She wrote a lot of things down. Did you tell her the truth? He looked at her. It was a look that had a lot in it, the assessment of someone deciding how much trust the question deserved. Yes, he said. All of it. She nodded. Good. She paused. The report will go to the formal review panel. It helps build the case for your welfare situation. I want you to know that what you tell people about your time there, it matters. It's evidence. You're not making trouble by saying it. He absorbed this. He looked back at the beetle, which had made its decision and was now heading purposefully to the left. My uncle used to say I was a troublemaker, he said. That anything that went wrong was my fault. Even if I didn't do anything. Yes, Amelia said. That is a thing that people who harm children often say, because it's more comfortable than the alternative. She said it plainly, not gently, because gentle would have been condescending. He was 7 but he was not fragile, and she had realized already that what he needed was not careful handling but honest speaking. What happened in that house was not your fault, Harry. Any of it. He was quiet for a moment. Gerald the frog moved 3 inches to the left. The beetle had disappeared. I know, Harry said. He said it in a way that meant I'm beginning to know, which was the actual beginning of a thing rather than the performance of one, and she thought, yes, good, that's the real start. I want to ask you something, he said. His voice had shifted slightly, more deliberate. She recognized the register, it was the voice he used when he'd been sitting on a question and had decided to bring it out. About Sirius Black. You said you were looking into his case. I did say that. Why? She looked at him. She made a decision, the same decision she'd been making by degrees since she'd watched him in the atrium with his chin up. He was going to live in the middle of this story. He was going to find out pieces of it regardless, because he was clever and because Susan talked and because children who'd learned early to read their environments were very good at reading them. She could feed him information in controlled doses and he would fill in the gaps with imagination, or she could tell him the functional truth. Because there's no record of him ever having a trial, she said. And in my department, that is a very serious problem regardless of what I think about whether someone is guilty. Harry went very still. She could see him processing it, assembling the pieces. He was fast. So he might not have done it, he said. Not a question. A calculation arriving at its answer. I don't know that, she said carefully. I genuinely don't. What I know is that the process was wrong, and a wrong process doesn't give us a right answer. It gives us an unchecked answer, which is a different thing. He sat with this. He pulled up a blade of grass and turned it in his fingers. If he didn't do it, he said, slowly, then my parents are dead because of someone else. And he's been in Azkaban for 6 years for something he didn't do. He paused. That would be really bad. Yes, Amelia said. It would. Are you going to fix it? There was something so direct and simple in the question, not demanding, not dramatic, just asking, that she felt the weight of it. The way he asked it was the way you asked about something you'd stopped expecting to be fixed and were now, cautiously, revising that expectation. I'm going to find out the truth, she said. Whatever it is. And then the law will do what the law does. She paused. I can't promise you any particular outcome. But I can promise you that I will not stop until I have the truth, and that I will not let either of those things, what's right for you and what's right for Sirius Black, get decided by what's convenient. He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were so green and so sharp, and sometimes, when he was very still and thinking hard, you could see the outline of something in him that had nothing to do with his age, a quality of perception that felt much older, forged in conditions that should never have been the conditions of a 7-year-old's life. Okay, he said. Then, unexpectedly, do you think he's innocent? She considered giving him the professional answer. She dismissed it. I think something is wrong with the story I was told, she said. That's not the same as innocent. But it's enough to look harder. She paused. Why? He turned the blade of grass over in his fingers. Because if he's innocent, then he's been alone in Azkaban for 6 years and he's the only person who actually knew my parents. He looked up at her. Not from pictures or newspaper articles. Really knew them. The sentence hung in the warm evening air. Amelia Bones, who was not a woman given to displays of feeling, felt it land somewhere real and stayed with it rather than glossing past it. She thought about this boy at Privet Drive with no photographs, no stories told with love, no one who knew his parents in the warm and specific way that the people who loved them would have known them. She thought about what that was like to carry. I know, she said quietly. Then find out fast, Harry said. He said it simply, without drama, the way he said most things. A request from someone who had learned to make requests carefully and only when they mattered. I intend to, she said. Susan appeared at the back door. She had ink on her left hand and the look of someone who has written 4 opening sentences and hated all of them. The letter is terrible, she announced. Harry, your advice is bad. I can't start in the middle. Why not? Because then grandmother thinks I've lost my mind. He stood up, grass on his jeans. Give it here, I'll show you. They went inside. Amelia stayed on the step for a moment longer, looking at the garden in the fading light. Gerald the frog sat motionless on his stone like an extremely small, smug philosopher. The memo from Tonks arrived the next morning at 7:45 while Amelia was on her second cup of tea and her third piece of parchment. Tonks was 23 and had the same methodical attention to detail that Amelia had been told, by her senior Aurors, was unusual in someone that young and that naturally chaotic in every other respect of her personality. The memo was dense, 3 pages, small writing, her handwriting shifting slightly between sentences the way her handwriting did when she wrote quickly. Amelia read it twice. The blast pattern report from the 1981 scene, Tonks had noted, was written by an Auror named Perkins who had since retired. Perkins had documented the crater, the Muggle casualties, the residue on Black's wand. He had also written, in a section marked additional observations that had apparently been filed and never followed up on, a single line, blast pattern analysis suggests point of origin may be inconsistent with wand position at time of arrest. Recommend further analysis. The further analysis had never been conducted. That was the first thing. The second thing was the Pettigrew identification. The finger had been matched to Pettigrew by means of a standard magical identification charm. Tonks had pulled the record of who had performed the charm. It had been performed by one Auror, unwitnessed, without the required counter-verification from a second Auror that the procedures of 1981 explicitly demanded. That was the second thing. The third thing was a small addendum at the bottom of Tonks's memo, written in slightly different ink, the kind of different ink that meant she'd gone back and added it after she'd already finished. One more thing. Cross-referenced Black's wand with the dark magic register for October 1981. His wand was used to cast a blasting curse 3 days before the Potter's deaths. Location, Godric's Hollow. That usage was logged and noted. Aurors investigated, concluded it was part of some unrelated Order activity. But I pulled the file on it and it's thin. Possible it was a defensive charm, possible it was something else. Flagging in case it's relevant. Amelia set the memo down. She sat for a moment in the particular quality of silence that was not empty but full of the shape of something becoming visible, a structure emerging from what had looked like chaos. It was the feeling she'd been chasing for 30 years, every time a case began to cohere, when the random-seeming pieces started finding their places in a pattern. She thought about Peter Pettigrew. One finger and a wand and witnesses who saw Sirius Black laughing. She thought about the blast pattern that an Auror had flagged and no one had followed up on. She thought about a verification charm performed by one person without a witness. She thought about Albus Dumbledore saying I believed him guilty with the care of someone choosing their words very specifically. She thought, guilty of what, exactly? She pulled a fresh piece of parchment toward her and wrote a memo to the Wisengamot clerk's office requesting emergency scheduling under Section 8, Subsection 4. She wrote another to Griselda. She wrote a third to the Azkaban administration, this time not asking for a status report but for something specific, a list of every request Sirius Black had made since his incarceration, and whether he had ever asked for a trial. Then she sat back and thought about what she was going to say to Harry Potter when this broke open, and it was going to break open. She was now almost certain of that, because this was not a case that was going to stay quiet. This was a case that had been quiet for 6 years through negligence and assumption and the general desire of people who'd survived a war not to look too closely at its loose ends, and Amelia Bones had now picked up every loose end she could find and she was going to pull them all. She was going to find Peter Pettigrew, or find the truth about Peter Pettigrew, or find the particular evidence that proved beyond any doubt that Sirius Black was guilty. She didn't care which outcome it was. She cared that the outcome was real and provable and arrived at properly. She pulled the Harry Potter welfare file and the Sirius Black file side by side on her desk and looked at them together for a moment, the way they connected, not accidentally, not coincidentally. One child at Privet Drive, one man in Azkaban, and both of them there because of a sequence of events in 1981 that had been written down hurriedly, assumed to be obvious, and filed away. She thought, should have looked at this years ago. The thought had the particular sting of things that were true and couldn't be made untrue by wishing. She thought, I'm looking at it now. She got to work. That evening Harry was at the kitchen table when she came home, doing sums on a piece of paper that turned out to be his primary school maths homework, which he'd brought in the school bag and was completing with the self-contained discipline of someone who finished things because finishing things was what you did. Susan was next to him, not doing anything useful, eating an apple and watching him work with the companionable lack of purpose that was Susan's default mode when she wasn't actively engaged in something. She keeps watching me, Harry said, without looking up from the sums. I'm not watching you, I'm watching the pencil, Susan said. Why? It moves in a really satisfying way when you write numbers. Harry looked up at her. He had the expression of someone who had decided, somewhere in the last 48 hours, that Susan Bones was completely baffling and also fine. That's odd, he said. I know, she said cheerfully. Amelia hung her robe. She put the kettle on. She stood at the stove and felt the specific settling that the kitchen did to her at the end of a long day, the particular reset of coming into a warm room with people in it. It was different with Harry there. Not louder or more complicated, just, more present. The house had more weight in it. She found she didn't mind. I had a question, Harry said. He'd finished the last sum and was looking at the paper with his pencil tapping lightly on the table, the physical sign of a thought working its way out. About magic. Ask. When do I get to learn it? Properly, I mean. Not just when it happens by accident. Hogwarts at 11, she said. That's when formal magical education starts. That's 4 years. Yes. He thought about this. But some things, like you, when you do things, you don't need a wand. You know what it is, what you're doing. You know how to control it. I have training, she said. 25 years of it. Can I have some? He said it carefully, in the way he made requests, not demanding, not expecting yes, but asking because asking was permitted and the answer could be no. Not full training. I don't mean that. Just, I'd like to understand it. What it is. Why it happens. When I get scared sometimes, or angry, things, he stopped. Things happen around you, she said. Yes. And I don't understand why or how to stop it or if I should stop it or, you shouldn't stop it, she said. She said it firmly, the way she'd say a fact. She turned around from the stove to face him directly because this felt like a conversation worth facing. Your magic is not a problem, Harry. It is not something to suppress or hide or be ashamed of. It is part of you, the same as your green eyes or your ability to do sums faster than apparently necessary. A pause. What you can learn, and what I can help you with, is understanding it. Not controlling it the way you'd hold something down, but understanding why it responds the way it does, so you can work with it instead of against it. He was listening with his whole body, the stillness that meant full attention. How? I know a bit about accidental magic in young children, she said. Enough to help you start to understand your own. She looked at him. We can start this weekend if you like. He didn't say really. Or are you sure? He just nodded, once, the same decisive nod as the ministry atrium. Yes please, he said. Susan bit into her apple loudly. I want to watch, she said. You have your own magical education, Amelia said. I know, but Harry's will be more interesting because it's new. She looked at Harry. No offense. None taken, Harry said. He looked at Amelia. She can watch if she wants. I don't mind. Amelia poured her tea. The kettle steam rose and fogged the kitchen window for a moment, and through it the garden was a blur of green and the last of the day's light. She could see the spot near the back wall where Harry had sat that afternoon with the beetle, and she thought about the thread she was pulling at her desk and all the places it seemed to lead, and she thought about this boy at her kitchen table, doing his homework with a pencil that apparently moved in a satisfying way. She thought, one thing at a time. She thought, but the things are connected. She thought, let's see where the thread goes. Chapter 4, The Headmaster's Gambit. The weekend arrived with rain. It came an overnight Friday, the proper summer kind that felt almost deliberate, heavy and warm and steady against the windows. Harry woke at 6 to the sound of it and lay for a moment listening, which was something he'd been doing all week, lying still and listening to the house and cataloging what normal sounded like. Rain on windows. The cat moving somewhere downstairs. Pipes in the walls. The distant sound of Amelia's study door when she came down early. He was starting to know the house's sounds the way he'd known the Dursleys, the exact creak of the third stair, the particular hiss of the kettle before it boiled, the way the back gate latch sounded different when the wood was wet. He'd learned that knowledge at Privet Drive out of necessity, so he'd know when someone was coming and could look appropriately busy or absent depending on what the situation required. Here he was learning it for no reason except that he noticed things and couldn't quite stop. He was working on whether that was the same impulse or a different one. He dressed and went downstairs. Amelia was already in the kitchen. She had paperwork spread across half the table, which was apparently where she worked when she brought things home from the ministry. She had a cup of tea and the focused, slightly remote expression she wore when she was reading something closely. She looked up when he came in. Tea's fresh, she said. Toast if you want. He made toast. He sat at the clear half of the table and ate it without saying anything, which he'd found was permitted here. Silence was not interpreted as sulking or resentment or whatever other loaded meaning it had carried at Privet Drive, it was just silence, and both he and Amelia were comfortable in it in a way that felt, oddly, like the most companionable thing about sharing a house with her. After a while she set her parchment down and picked up her tea. "We'll start this afternoon," she said. "When the rain eases." "In the garden?" "Study. I want to use the instruments." She looked at him over her cup. "I'm not going to teach you spells, you haven't got a wand and you don't need one at your age anyway. What I want to do is help you understand what your magic actually feels like from the inside. Where it lives. What triggers it." She paused. "Have you ever felt it? Deliberately, not as an accident?" He thought about it honestly. "Sometimes when I'm really happy," he said. "Or when he stopped." "Frightened," she said. "Angry," he said. "Both are important." She put her cup down. "We'll look at both." Susan appeared at the door to the kitchen in her dressing gown with her hair doing several things at once, squinting at the morning with profound personal grievance. She looked at Harry eating toast, then at Amelia's paperwork, then at the rain-streaked window. "It's Saturday," she said, as though this were an injustice requiring acknowledgement. "It is," Amelia agreed. "Why is everyone awake?" "Some people," Harry said, "just wake up." Susan sat down and pulled the toast toward her with the mechanical motion of someone eating out of principle rather than hunger. "Aunt Amelia," she said, after a moment. "Is Professor Dumbledore coming today?" Harry looked up. Amelia was already looking at Susan with the expression she wore when something had been said in the wrong order. "What makes you ask that?" she said, carefully. "Because I heard you on the floor last night and his name came up and also you have your formal reading glasses on." Susan bit her toast. "You only wear those when someone important is coming." Amelia touched the glasses that were, in fact, on her face, and looked briefly like she wished her 11-year-old niece were marginally less perceptive. "He may stop by this morning," she said. "Why?" Harry asked. His voice was level but something in him had gone still in the assessing way. He put his toast down. "What does he want?" "To talk," Amelia said. "About your situation. I've been keeping him informed." She met Harry's eyes directly. "He has an interest in your welfare. He's been the person most invested in your safety for the last 6 years, in his way." "In his way," Harry repeated, hearing the exact qualification. "Yes. In his way." She was honest about it, not dismissive of Dumbledore and not defensive of him either. Just the plainness of a complicated truth. "I want you to meet him, if you're willing. You don't have to. But at some point you'll need to understand who he is and what his role has been, and doing it here, where I'm present, is better than doing it somewhere else." Harry thought about this. He'd read about Dumbledore in the Hogwarts, a history, which described him in terms that were several steps below hagiography but clearly trying to be restrained about it. "Brilliant," the book said. "Greatest wizard of the age. Defeated Grindelwald. Current headmaster." He'd thought about him in the indirect, structural way he'd been thinking about all the people who'd made decisions around him before he was old enough to have any say in those decisions. "Okay," he said. "I'll meet him." Susan was watching him with the particular attention she'd been directing at him all week, not concerned, not pitying, just present. She reached over and took the last piece of his toast without asking, which was so ordinary that Harry felt the knot loosen another fraction. Dumbledore arrived at 10:30 through the flue. Harry heard the sound from upstairs. He was in his room pretending to read, actually listening, a rushing, crackling sound and then Amelia's voice, and then a deeper voice, measured and warm in a way that carried through the floorboards without being loud. He waited. He heard Amelia say something about the sitting room. He heard footsteps. He waited another 5 minutes, which felt appropriate as a signal that he wasn't simply sitting there waiting, and then he went downstairs. The sitting room was at the front of the house, slightly formal, with good chairs and bookshelves and a fireplace that was clearly used rather than decorative. Amelia was standing near the window. Dumbledore was in the chair that faced the door. He was not what Harry had constructed in his head. The pictures Harry had seen, in the history, in a magazine Susan had lying around, showed a tall old man in grand robes with a great beard and half-moon spectacles and the general bearing of someone who knew he was important. The man in the chair was that but also not that. He was taller than the pictures suggested, with eyes that were blue in a specific way that reminded Harry of depth rather than color. He looked at Harry when Harry came in, and his expression did something that was not quite a smile but was warm in a way that felt, not performed, real. "Harry," he said. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. He crossed the room and sat in the remaining chair with the composed, watchful stillness he'd developed over 7 years of reading rooms that could turn on him. He wasn't frightened. He was curious, which felt better. "It's very good to meet you properly," Dumbledore said. He said it simply, without the weight of occasion some adults loaded onto first meetings. "Is it?" Harry said. Amelia made a small sound near the window that could have been a cough. Dumbledore looked at Harry with an expression that recalibrated slightly, and Harry had the sense of a man who had been prepared for a 7-year-old and was now meeting the specific person who happened to be 7 years old, which was a different thing. "Yes," Dumbledore said, and this time it was more direct, without the social lacquer. "I have thought about you a great deal for 6 years. Meeting you is, yes, it is good." "Why did you think about me?" Harry asked. "Because I cared about what happened to you." "But you didn't check." He said it without accusation, without heat. Just the observation, stated plainly, the way you stated a fact you'd already made peace with. "You put me with the Dursleys and you didn't come by." "Nobody did." "For 6 years." The room was very quiet. Rain tapped at the window. Amelia, who Harry was beginning to understand had engineered this meeting with the specific precision she applied to everything, stayed near the window and let it happen. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. He looked at Harry with the expression of a man who had said I knew the trial had been expedited to Amelia Bones and had meant something harder and more honest by it than he'd wanted to. "You're right," he said. "I cared and I did not act on that care in the way that I should have. Those two things are both true and I will not try to talk my way around the gap between them." Harry looked at him. He was checking for the thing behind the sentence, the deflection, the justification, the but. There wasn't one. It sat there, plain and complete. "Why the Dursleys?" Harry said. "Specifically." Dumbledore glanced at Amelia. She gave him a look that said, clearly, I already told him the functional version, tell him the real one. "Your mother," Dumbledore said, "performed a very old, very powerful magic in the moment she died. She sacrificed herself for you, and that sacrifice created a protection, a charm bound to her blood. As long as you could call the place where her blood lived home, that protection held." He paused. "Petunia Dursley was your mother's sister. Her blood." Harry absorbed this. He filed it. He looked at his hands on his knees for a moment. "So it worked," he said. "The protection." "Yes. Effectively. And the cost of it was the Dursleys." "The cost was that you needed to live somewhere Petunia Dursley was," Dumbledore said. "What happened in that house beyond that requirement is something I did not do enough to monitor, and I am sorry for it." Harry looked at him for a long time. Something in his chest was doing a complicated thing, not softening, exactly, but adjusting. He had thought, lying in his room with the torch, about Dumbledore in the abstract, the architect of his placement, the chess player, the man who had calculated. He had thought of him the way you thought of a structure rather than a person. Sitting across from him now, he found a person. Complicated, genuinely regretful, brilliant and fallible at the same time. "If there was another way to keep me safe," Harry said, "that wasn't the Dursleys." Is there one? Amelia and her team are working on that question, Dumbledore said. I believe there may be. Good. Harry sat back. He was done with that section. He moved to the next. What do you know about Sirius Black? Dumbledore looked at him very carefully now, with the full attention that was slightly different from the warm attention of a moment ago, sharper, more measured. I know that he was your parents' friend, Harry said. I read about him in the magazine Susan had. There was an article about the war. It said he was their secret keeper. He watched Dumbledore's face. Was he? He was meant to be, Dumbledore said. At the last moment, we changed it. Peter Pettigrew became the secret keeper instead. Almost no one knew. Harry processed this with the focused speed that Amelia had noticed at the kitchen table. The sums worked quickly and thoroughly. So if Pettigrew was the secret keeper, he said, then Pettigrew was the one who could tell Voldemort where my parents were. Dumbledore was very still. And if Pettigrew was the one who told, Harry continued, not looking away from Dumbledore's face, then Sirius Black didn't do it. The rain was louder for a moment. Somewhere upstairs a floorboard creaked, which was either the house or Susan, who was supposed to be writing letters. That is the question Miss Bones is investigating, Dumbledore said. His voice was careful in a way it hadn't been before this point in the conversation. But you thought of it before her, Harry said. Didn't you? You knew Pettigrew was the secret keeper and you still thought Black betrayed them. I thought Sirius may have arranged the switch in order to deflect suspicion from himself, Dumbledore said. That was always a possibility. But you don't know. No. So there's a man in Azkaban and you don't know if he did it. Harry, Amelia said from the window. Her voice was gentle, not stopping him, just placing herself in the room. I know, Harry said. He looked at his hands again. He breathed out slowly, the way he'd started doing this week when he felt the magic beginning to respond to something, a technique Amelia had described on Thursday, just the breath, just the act of choosing it. He felt the faint warmth of it settle. I know you're investigating, he said to Amelia. Then, to Dumbledore, I'm not angry. I just want to understand what happened. That, Dumbledore said, quietly, is one of the things about you that would have made your parents very proud. Harry looked at him sharply, checking, again, for performance. He found none. He found something that looked, actually, like grief. Old grief, carried a long time, resurfacing. He didn't say anything. He looked at the fireplace instead and thought about his mother choosing to die rather than step aside, and thought about what kind of magic that was, and thought about the protection it had made, and thought about whether the thing you got in exchange for your mother's life being a house with the Dursleys in it was a fair trade, and arrived at the answer he'd known he'd arrive at, which was that fairness wasn't the point, hadn't ever been the point, and the point was what you did next. I want to go to Hogwarts, he said. It came out more definitive than he'd planned. When I'm old enough. I want to actually go, properly, not just, I want it to be an actual thing. Of course, Dumbledore said. He seemed genuinely startled by the shift. I want to learn magic. Properly. And I don't want it to be something other people manage or decide about. He looked at Dumbledore. When I get to Hogwarts, am I going to be able to just be a student? Or is there always going to be a reason why things have to be a certain way because of me specifically? Dumbledore held his gaze. He looked like a man choosing between two versions of an answer and having the dignity to take the harder one. There are things about your situation that will always require care, he said. Voldemort's followers are still out there. There are those who would want to harm you, or use you. I will not pretend that your life is an ordinary one. He paused. But Hogwarts can be yours. I can promise you that. Whatever else is true, what you make of those years is your own. Harry nodded. He stood up. He was done, he'd decided, not because the conversation wasn't useful but because he'd gotten what he'd come for and he didn't need to perform more engagement than that. "Thank you for coming," he said, with the genuine politeness of someone who actually meant it rather than the reflexive politeness of someone who'd been taught to perform it. "I think your intentions are good," he added. "I think you make decisions that cost other people and call it necessary, and you should know when you're doing that." He said it without malice, just precision, the way he said everything. "I'll probably talk to you a lot more. At school and before. But I wanted to say that while it was just us." Dumbledore looked at him for a moment with an expression that was quite hard to read, something complicated and specific, like recognition crossed with something that was almost chastened. "Thank you for saying it," he said. Harry went to the door. He paused and looked back at Amelia. She was looking at him with the expression she wore when she didn't want him to see what her expression was doing, which meant it was doing something she found inconvenient. He gave her a small nod and went upstairs. She heard his footsteps on the stairs and then the sound of his door closing, and then the house was quiet except for the rain and Dumbledore still in his chair. "Well," Dumbledore said, after a moment. "Yes," Amelia agreed. "He's extraordinary." "I know. James and Lily in equal measure." He said it quietly. James's directness. Lily's, the way Lily could understand a person from the inside very quickly, and tell them what she saw without cruelty. Amelia came and sat in the chair Harry had vacated. "You need to give me everything you have," she said. "On the blood wards. On Pettigrew. On the night of October 31st in full." She looked at him. "No more partial information, Albus. I understand you've spent 6 years managing this situation with one hand. I'm asking you to let me take the other half." He looked at his hands. He looked up at her. "Pettigrew was a skilled enough occlumens that he fooled everyone," he said. "Including me. That is not, I don't say it to defend myself. I say it because it is relevant to understanding how long this was hidden. If he is alive, and I am not saying he is, if he is alive," Amelia said, "he would be in hiding. He was an animagus. Registered, no, unregistered. A rat." He said the word with a specific disgust that was different from his usual measured delivery. She looked at him. "An unregistered animagus." "Yes. So if Peter Pettigrew faked his own death and transformed, he could be anywhere," Dumbledore said. "And he could be anywhere in a form that would be essentially invisible." Amelia stood up. She walked to her desk in the corner of the sitting room and began writing immediately, with the rapid, dense efficiency of someone who'd been waiting for a specific piece of information and had just received it. "An unregistered rat animagus," she said, writing. "Who was supposedly killed by Sirius Black. Who left one finger behind." She looked up. "A finger that was never counter-verified for identification." "No," Dumbledore said quietly. "Who could be alive and in hiding." She set her quill down. She looked at Dumbledore with the full force of the expression she used when the shape of something had become clear. "If Pettigrew is alive," she said, "and we can find him, the entire case against Sirius Black collapses. There is no murder. There is a faked death and 6 years of a man in Azkaban for a crime that didn't happen." She paused. "Why didn't you tell me this when I first asked about Black?" Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. "Because," he said, and she could hear him finding the honest answer under the several easier ones, "I was not certain, and uncertainty about this particular matter has very large consequences, and I have spent 6 years, managing. As you said. Managing consequences and not always thinking carefully enough about whether what I was managing and what was right were the same thing." It was the most honest thing she'd heard him say in 30 years of knowing him. She noted it, filed it, and chose not to reward it with more grace than it deserved, because he'd waited 6 years and she was not going to let that be free. "I'll need a full sworn statement," she said. "About the secret keeper switch. In writing, under veritaserum if the Wisengamot requires it." Whatever you need, he said. Good. She looked at her parchment. She was already composing the next 5 steps. She was going to need Tonks on Pettigrew. She was going to need a trace on Animaga's signatures in Britain, possible, not easy, but possible with the right instruments. She was going to need the Weisengamot hearing scheduled immediately. She was going to need, she heard, faintly, from upstairs, the sound of Harry reading out loud to himself. She couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of it, a child's voice, slightly flat in the way people went when they were absorbed in something, tracking the words not for performance but for understanding. She looked at Dumbledore. He was listening too, his face doing something she didn't have a name for. He's going to need to know, she said. When this moves forward. I won't keep it from him. I know, Dumbledore said. His welfare is not negotiable. Not in exchange for any strategic consideration, not for the blood wards, not for Amelia. He looked at her. I know. You made that clear already. I know I did. I'm making it clear again. She held his gaze. He told you to your face that you make decisions that cost other people. He's 7. I want to make sure we both understand that his assessment is correct and that we are not going to repeat that pattern. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. You have become very fond of him, he said. It was not an accusation and not exactly an observation. It was the recognition of a fact between two people who were too old for pretense. I have not. She picked up her quill. I have become invested in him, which is a different thing, and which is also entirely appropriate given the circumstances. Dumbledore did something she hadn't expected, which was smile, not the public smile, not the headmasterly one. A smaller one, more private. Of course, he said. Was there anything else? He stood. The blood ward alternatives. I've done some preliminary thinking since Tuesday. There are 2 approaches that might work, a Fidelius variant, or a modification of the ancestral blood ward that could attach to a different anchor. He paused. I'll have a full write-up for you by next week. Wednesday, she said. Wednesday, he agreed. He moved toward the flue. He paused, in the way he always paused, because he was constitutionally, he's going to be all right, he said. Yes, Amelia said, writing. He is. Dumbledore left. She heard the flue rush. The sitting room went quiet. She sat for a moment with her quill held still over the parchment and thought about 1 finger and a rat and 6 years and the specific, compounding weight of the things people didn't look at because looking made them responsible. Then she went back to the list of things she was going to do, and she started doing them. That afternoon the rain thinned to something light and thoughtful, and Amelia cleared the desk in her study for the first time in approximately 3 months, which Susan witnessed from the doorway and commented on with audible amazement. You're clearing the desk, Susan said. I can see that, Amelia replied. Should I write this down? The date? Susan. I'm just saying, this might be a historical event. Go and get Harry, Amelia said. Harry came in and looked at the cleared desk with the curiosity he directed at everything that was new, examining rather than exclaiming. On the desk Amelia had placed 3 objects, a glass instrument like a very small weather vane, a flat piece of polished dark stone, and a brass compass that didn't point north. The vane reads magical output, she said, when he was settled in the chair in front of the desk. Susan was on the window seat with a book she was using as a prop while she watched. The stone measures emotional resonance in magical signatures. The compass, she tilted her head, measures raw potential. I use it for diagnostic work. She paused. I want to look at your magic directly. Not to assess it in any formal sense, just to understand it. Is that all right? Yes, he said. I want you to think about something that makes you happy. Really think about it, not just the idea of happiness but a specific thing. She watched him. Don't tell me what it is. Just think about it and let yourself feel it. He was quiet for a moment. His eyes went slightly unfocused, which meant he'd found the thing and was in it. On the desk the glass vane began to turn, slowly, then faster. The dark stone warmed from gray to a deep amber gold. The compass swung wide, settled, then extended past its maximum marker in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Amelia looked at the compass. She kept her expression neutral. Susan, on the window seat, had lowered her book. "All right," Amelia said. "Now something that frightened you. A memory, if you have one you're comfortable with." He shifted slightly. The quality of his stillness changed, a different kind, more careful. The vane slowed. The stone went dark gray. The compass pulled in the opposite direction and then swung violently, oscillating. "Okay," she said quickly. "Stop. Come back. Think about the happy thing again." He breathed out. Slowly. The compass steadied. The stone warmed back. "You did that deliberately," she said. "The breath. You told me on Thursday," he said. "The breath is choosing. You said that." "I did." She looked at him. She was good at maintaining professional composure in situations that surprised her. She had needed it more with Harry than she'd needed it with any adult in years. "Do it again. The same frightened memory, but this time, before you go into it, take that breath first. Choose before the memory, not after." He looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who understood what she was asking and was deciding whether he wanted to try it. Then he breathed in slowly. He held it for a second. He let it out. He thought about the frightening thing. The compass moved, but this time it didn't oscillate. It swung to its maximum and held there, steady. The stone went dark, but the darkness was even, not agitated. The vane moved in one smooth direction. "There," Amelia said, quietly. He came back from wherever he'd been. He looked at the instruments and then at her. "What does that mean?" "It means you can direct it," she said. "Not control. I want to be clear about that distinction. Control means suppression, means forcing it down, and that never works long-term and it damages the magic and the person. Direction is different. Direction is choosing the shape of what's already happening." She paused. "Your magic is very strong, Harry. Stronger than I expected, though, I'll be honest, the compass has been on the maximum before and come back, so I want to test it more before I make any statements about what that means." "But it's mine," he said. "Completely." He looked at the instruments. He picked up the stone, she let him, it was safe to handle, and turned it over in his hands. It was cool on the outside and warm somewhere inside it, like something living. "This is what it feels like," he said. "Inside. Sometimes. When it's good." "Yes," she said. "That's the resonance." He set it down carefully. "Can I do it again?" "Yes. This time I want you to." She stopped because the compass had begun to move before she'd said anything, before Harry had done anything consciously. It was turning slowly, tracking something, and the direction it was turning toward was Harry with the steadiness of something pointing at true north rather than magnetic north. She looked at the compass. She looked at Harry. He looked back at her with his green eyes behind the taped glasses and said, "What's it doing?" "It's pointing at you," she said. "Is that normal?" "No." She picked the compass up and looked at it closely. The needle was pulling so strongly that when she moved it away from him it dragged slightly back. She set it down. "No, that is not what this compass normally does." She looked at him with the expression she wore when something had just upgraded its classification in her mind. "It normally points toward a concentration of magical power. It's designed to find power sources." Harry looked at the compass. He looked at Amelia. "So it thinks I'm a concentration of magical power," he said, without drama, as a fact to be examined. "The compass doesn't think," she said. It measures. Okay, he said. He filed it. He added it to the list of things to understand later. He looked at her with the practical directness that was so entirely itself. What do we do next? From the window seat Susan said, very quietly, mostly to herself, I knew Gerald was right about him. What? Harry said. Nothing. She raised her book. Carry on. Amelia looked at her niece for a moment, then at the boy in front of her desk with his taped glasses and his steady breath and his compass-pointing magic, and thought, the frog has nothing to do with it, but she's not wrong. Out loud she said, next we work on the breath with movement. I want to see what happens when you use it while walking. It sounds simple but it isn't. She stood up. Come on then. He stood up immediately. He was always ready for the next thing. She led him to the clear space in the center of the study where the rug was rolled back, and she started to teach him, not spells, not formal magic, just the most fundamental thing, which was how to be in the same room as your own power without flinching from it, and without it running ahead of you, and without calling it a problem. He was, as the compass had suggested, a remarkably fast student. By the time Mrs. Hartley called them for dinner, he'd held the breathing technique through 5 different memory triggers, including one that had blown out the lamp on the far side of the room, which he'd been visibly startled by and then immediately straightened up from as though he was going to pretend it hadn't happened. Don't, Amelia said. He looked at her. Don't pretend that didn't happen. It happened. Your magic did that because it's strong and you were feeling something strongly and the technique needs more practice. That's all it means. She paused. Nothing that your magic does is something to be ashamed of. He looked at the extinguished lamp. He looked at her. He said, it was when I thought about Mrs. Collins writing excellent work, Harry on my test and my uncle's face when he saw it. She looked at him. She understood the exact emotional architecture of that, the pride and the grief of it coexisting. That makes complete sense, she said. She relit the lamp with a gesture. Again. Same memory. Breath first. He squared his shoulders. He breathed in. He breathed out. The lamp stayed lit. Chapter 5, The Empty Chair. The memo from Azkaban arrived on Monday morning and it was worse than Amelia had expected, which was saying something, because she had expected it to be bad. Prisoner 4892, Sirius Orain Black, had submitted 14 written requests over 6 years. She read through the list. 3 requests for legal representation. 4 requests for a hearing before the Wisengamot. 2 requests to speak with the minister directly. 1 request for access to a copy of his own arrest record. The remaining 4 were personal, requests to receive news about a child named Harry Potter, 2 of them asking only whether the boy was alive and well. Every single request had been denied. The denial notices were form letters, identical across all 14, stamped with the DMLE authorization code that meant they had been processed and refused at departmental level. Amelia checked the authorization codes. They traced back to Crouch's tenure, the first few, and then to the administrative structure that had continued more or less unchanged after Crouch left. Nobody had flagged them. Nobody had escalated. A man asking 14 times for basic legal process and 14 times being told no, and nobody in her department had thought to check whether those denials were lawful. She put the memo down. She picked it up. She put it down again. She went to the window for 60 seconds. Then she came back and pulled the Wisengamot scheduling request she'd submitted on Friday, checked the status, approved, hearing date set for Thursday, emergency session, and wrote a memo to the Azkaban administration that was 3 paragraphs long and contained language she rarely used in official correspondence. The first paragraph informed them that prisoner 4892 was to be transferred to the ministry holding facility on Wednesday evening in preparation for a Thursday hearing, under order escort, with full medical evaluation upon arrival. The second paragraph informed them that any further denial of legal requests from any prisoner without documented legal justification would be considered obstruction of justice and would be investigated as such, effective immediately. The third paragraph was shorter than the other two and said, essentially, that she would be reviewing all request logs from the last decade across all Azkaban prisoners, and that they should prepare the relevant records accordingly. She sealed it with her personal seal and sent it before she'd finished her first cup of tea. Then she walked down the hall to her spare office where Tonks had set up what she'd cheerfully called the Pettigrew problem and everyone else had started calling the wall, a large piece of parchment pinned to the board that Tonks added things to in handwriting that got smaller and more excited as the theory developed. Tonks was already there. She was 23 and had turquoise hair today, which changed color with her mood and apparently turquoise meant focused. She had a cup of tea balanced on the edge of the board's frame and was adding something near the bottom of the parchment in the very small handwriting. "Morning," she said, without turning around. "What's new?" Amelia said. "Two things." Tonks turned around. She had ink on her nose and the expression of someone who had not slept much and found this acceptable because the reason was interesting. The blast pattern. "I went back to Perkins, retired, lives in Dorset now, was very happy to talk about it. I think he's been waiting 6 years for someone to ask." She held up a parchment. "He told me that when he wrote blast pattern analysis suggests point of origin may be inconsistent with wand position, what he actually meant was that there was no way the blast originated from Black's wand at the angle Black was standing. The crater spread from a point approximately 6 feet to Black's left, at ground level. Black was standing upright." She paused. Perkins said he was told by his supervisor at the time to note it in the additional observations section and move on, because the witness statements were clear and the conviction wasn't in question. His supervisor, Amelia said. Dawlish Sr. Retired. Also in Dorset. Also apparently very happy to discuss it. Tonks's expression was complicated. "He told me he was acting on instruction from above. Didn't say who above." Amelia filed this. The second thing. Animaga's trace. Tonks moved to the left side of the board. "I ran the charm you asked for, tracking unregistered Animaga's signatures in Britain. It's not precise, it gives you clusters not locations, and it's reading historical data from the creature monitoring instruments so it's got a 3 to 5 year lag. But..." She pointed at the board. "There's a cluster. Southeast of England, recurring signature, consistent with a small mammal Animagus. The signature started appearing in the data in late 1981. It's been present, in varying locations across the southeast, every year since." Amelia looked at the board. "Late 1981, she said." "November," Tonks said. "Give or take a month for instrument lag. After Pettigrew allegedly died." "Yes." The room was quiet for a moment. Outside in the corridor someone walked past laughing at something. "I can't get a location from this," Tonks said. "Not a specific one. But the signature is consistent across years, same basic magical resonance, small mammal, unregistered. It's the same Animagus." She paused. "If Pettigrew is alive and hiding in rat form somewhere in the southeast, this is what we'd expect to see." "It's not evidence," Amelia said. "No," Tonks agreed. "But it's the shape of evidence. It's consistent with the hypothesis." She paused. "There's one more thing. I know you said 2 things but there's actually 3. Go on." "The finger." Tonks pulled a separate piece of parchment from the stack next to the board. "I contacted St. Mungo's research division. Asked them about identification charms on partial remains, specifically, what the margin of error is on a single source identification without counterverification." She looked at Amelia. "The margin of error on a single aura identification charm on a single finger, without counterverification, is approximately 23%. Meaning there is a 1 in 4 chance that the identification was wrong." Amelia stood very still. 1 in 4. 1 in 4. Tonks's voice was steady but her eyes were doing something complicated. And the finger was the only physical evidence that Pettigrew was there at all. Black's wand was there, yes, but Black's wand doesn't prove Pettigrew died. It proves Black cast a spell. She paused. And the blast pattern evidence says that spell didn't come from where Black was standing. Amelia looked at the board. She looked at 6 years of nothing, 14 requests denied, 1 wrong answer compounding into another, a man alone in the worst place in the world because nobody had looked carefully at the first step in the sequence. Right, she said. She turned around. Thursday. Thursday, Tonks confirmed. I want you in that hearing room, Amelia said. With all of this. She gestured at the board. Every piece of it. Written up formally, with your methodology, everything Perkins told you, the blast pattern discrepancy, the animagus trace, the margin of error on the identification. Everything. Tonks was already reaching for her quill. On it. Tonks. She stopped at the door. Good work. Tonks looked briefly like she'd been given something she didn't know what to do with, which was young people receiving praise they deserved. Yeah, she said. Okay. Thanks. She turned back to the board. On it, she said again, more quietly, to herself. She told Harry on Tuesday evening. She'd thought about how to do it all day, which was uncharacteristic. She usually knew how she wanted to approach a conversation from the first moment she identified the need for it. But Harry was a specific person and she'd spent enough time with him in the last week to know that what he needed was not management or carefulness but truth, and the question was just how much truth, and in what order. She found him in the garden at 5:30. He was showing Susan the breathing technique, which Susan was performing with visible skepticism and variable results. They were standing in the middle of the grass in the late afternoon sun, Harry giving instructions in the methodical way he'd absorbed them from Amelia, Susan attempting them with the air of someone who suspected the whole thing was made up and was going to be proved right at any moment. Breathe in first, Harry said. Before the thing happens, not after. But the thing hasn't happened yet, so how do I know when before is? You always know when before is, Harry said, with the patience of someone who had already had this argument twice today. You can feel it starting. There's he gestured at his chest. A warmth. Or pressure. It starts small before it's big. Susan stared at him. You've had this for like 5 days. I know. I've been at school for a whole year. I know. This is very irritating, Susan said, and then immediately produced a bloom of golden sparks from her right hand that startled her so much she fell backward onto the grass. Harry sat down next to her. He looked at the sparks where they'd fallen, already fading on the grass. He looked at his own hands. The two of them sat there in the late afternoon, not saying anything, both looking at the evidence of what they were, and Amelia stood at the kitchen door and thought, I need to tell him. She went out. Susan, she said. Can you give us a few minutes? Susan, who was extremely perceptive, said, sure, immediately and took herself off toward the house, stopping briefly to look at Amelia with an expression that asked a question without words. Amelia gave her a small nod that said he's fine, just go, and Susan went. Harry was watching her. He didn't ask what was coming, he waited, which was a thing he did that she'd noticed was not patience exactly but preparedness. She sat down on the grass next to him, which surprised him. She could see it in the slight adjustment of his posture. The recalibration of this is a formal conversation into this is a different kind. She'd done it deliberately. The Wisengamot hearing is Thursday, she said. For Sirius Black. Yes. She looked at the garden, the late light across the stones. I have significant new evidence. Enough that I believe the original case against him was either fundamentally flawed or actively tampered with. Possibly both. He was still. You think he's innocent? I think there is a very strong probability that he is, she said. Which is not the same as certainty. Thursday will determine more. She paused. I want you to be there. He turned to look at her. You don't have to be, she said. This is not a requirement. But he was your parents' friend, and the hearing is about what happened to your family as much as it's about him, and I think if he walks out of that hearing exonerated, it would be better for him and for you if he knew you were there. If the first time he sees you isn't some encounter on a street somewhere. Harry was quiet for a long moment. She let him be quiet. The garden settled into the specific peace of late afternoon. What will he be like? Harry said. She was honest. I don't know. 6 years in Azkaban does things to people. He's been surrounded by dementors for 6 years and it strips something from you. It might take time before he's himself. A pause. I don't know who himself is. I know who he was before. Whether that's still there is something we'll have to see. Who was he before? She thought about what she knew of Sirius Black from before 1981, the reputation, the Aura records, the stories. She thought about what Dumbledore had said on Saturday, and she thought about the 14 letters asking whether Harry was alive and well. She chose her words carefully, because she wanted to give him the truth without the speculation. He was reckless, she said. Funny, by most accounts. Extremely loyal to the people he considered his. He was an Auror for a short time, talented, too impatient for the work in the end. He loved your parents. She paused. The letters he wrote from Azkaban, 4 of his 14 requests asked about you specifically. Not asking to see you. Just asking if you were safe. Harry's hands were flat on his knees. He was looking straight ahead. Something in his face was moving, very slightly, in the way it moved when he was feeling something he hadn't decided to show. 4, he said. 4. He breathed in through his nose, slowly. She recognized the technique, he was using it without thinking about it now, which was the point of teaching it in the first place. Okay, he said. I'll be there. She nodded. I'll need to prepare you for what the hearing will look like. It's a formal Wisengamot session, which is, like a courtroom. Similar. More formal. A lot of people in robes in a large room. It can feel overwhelming. She looked at him. Are you easily overwhelmed? He looked back at her with the expression that had replaced his initial wariness over the last week, a directness that was almost dry. No, he said. I know, she said. I was checking. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile but adjacent to one. He looked back at the garden. After a moment he said, what happens if he's acquitted? Where does he go? She looked at him. That's a very good question. She paused. He would need rehabilitation support. A safe place to recover. Reconnection with the world he's been isolated from. She said the practical things first, and then, he's your godfather, Harry. That's a legal relationship in the wizarding world. It means he has a formal claim to your guardianship, if he wants it and if he's deemed fit. Harry was still. I'm not telling you that's what's going to happen, she said. I'm telling you it's a possibility that exists. There are a lot of steps between here and there, including the hearing itself, and the medical evaluation, and a formal fitness assessment. She looked at him steadily. But I thought you should know it exists. He absorbed this in silence. She could see the sequence assembling in him, not just the emotional weight of it but the structural understanding, the way he mapped new information against everything he'd already built. Is that what you want? He asked. For me to go to him, if he's fit? What I want, she said carefully, is for you to have a permanent home with someone who loves you specifically, not generally, not as a symbol or a responsibility, but you. If Sirius Black is that person and is able to be that person, then yes, that's what I would want. She paused. And if he's not, for whatever reason, there are other paths. This isn't the only door. He looked at her for a long moment. You're one of the other paths, he said. It was not a question. She was quiet for a moment. I said I would find you a permanent placement, she said. I meant it. Whatever form that takes. He nodded. He got to his feet, brushing grass off his jeans with the neat efficiency of someone tidying up after an internal decision had been made, not just a physical position. He looked down at her, still sitting on the grass, with the late sun making his dark hair look warm. I think I want to take the torch to bed tonight, he said. And read for a while. All right, she said. The history book is getting into Hogwarts founding, he said. Slytherin's arguments. Interesting section. He wasn't entirely wrong, Harry said, thoughtfully. About magical strength. He was wrong about blood being what determined it. But the idea that some magical people were more powerful than others and that this would cause conflict, that part seems pretty accurate. She looked up at him with the expression she'd been wearing more frequently over the last week, which was the expression of someone who had not expected to find this particular person in their spare bedroom and was recalibrating on a fairly regular basis. Good night, Harry, she said. Night, he said, and went inside. She sat in the garden for another few minutes. She thought about Thursday and everything that needed to happen before it. She thought about Sirius Black in a cell 6 years of Dementors deep and 14 letters and 4 of them asking about a boy he hadn't seen since the boy was 15 months old. She thought, let's see who's still in there. Wednesday came with its own weather, gray and close and still, the kind of day that felt like it was holding its breath. Amelia was at the ministry by 7, because Black's transfer was scheduled for 10 and she wanted the medical evaluation done and the evaluation report on her desk before she went into the hearing room Thursday morning. She was not in the transfer itself. She'd sent Tonks and an Auror named Shacklebolt, who was steady in the specific way that large, quiet people could be steady, and who she trusted to handle what they found without either drama or cruelty. She was in her office, working through the hearing documentation, when Tonks flooded at 11:30. He's here, Tonks said. Her hair was brown, which Amelia had come to understand meant serious. Medical evaluation in progress. How is he? A pause. He can hold a conversation, Tonks said. He knows where he is. He knows why he's here. Another pause. He asked about Harry. What exactly? He said, and I'm reading this because I wrote it down, is the boy alive? Tell me the boy is alive. Tonks's voice was level and professional and only slightly strained. I told him yes. He didn't say anything for about 30 seconds. Then he asked if he could have a cup of tea. Amelia breathed out slowly. Give him whatever he asks for, that's reasonable, she said. He's not a prisoner here. He's a witness pending exoneration. Yes, ma'am. A pause. He's thin, obviously. His eyes are, she stopped. You'll see. Amelia closed the flu connection. She stood at her desk for a moment. Then she went back to the documentation because there was nothing else to do right now and the documentation needed to be flawless. She went to the holding room at 3. He was sitting at the small table with a cup of tea in front of him that he'd apparently been holding for warmth rather than drinking. He was thin in the way that people were thin when food had been available but not really eating, the way grief thinned people rather than starvation. His hair was long and dark and his face had the hollowed-out quality of someone who had been alone with their own mind for 6 years with Dementors pulling at everything good in it. His eyes were gray and, as Tonks had said, she would see. She saw. They were too old. That was the only way to put it. The rest of him was 30, he'd been 21 when he went in, 27 now by the calendar, but something about his eyes had a depth that had nothing to do with his age, the look of someone who had visited places that take years off you in the directional sense, the sense of subtraction. He looked up when she came in. Amelia Bones, he said. His voice was rougher than she expected, the voice of someone who hadn't spoken much for 6 years. I remember you. From the war. You worked with Moody. Briefly, she said. She sat down across from him. She put the folder on the table. How are you feeling? Like I've been in Azkaban for 6 years. His voice was dry in a way that had enough personality in it to be a good sign. He looked at her steadily. You're the one who requested the hearing. Yes. Why? Not suspicion, genuine question. I sent 14 requests. 14. Why now? Because I found evidence I hadn't seen before, she said. And because I found other things that led me to look for it. She paused. I want to be honest with you about why you're here, Sirius. I'm going to present evidence tomorrow that I believe demonstrates your conviction was invalid on procedural grounds and that the physical evidence against you was inadequate and possibly falsified. I believe you're innocent. I want to be clear that I believe that, while also being clear that it is the Wisengamot that decides. He looked at her for a long time. Something moved through his face, not hope, quite. The face of someone who has learned to be careful with hope because hope is what the Dementors fed on. Something cautious and very alive at the same time, the way fire looked when the wind almost took it. You believe I'm innocent, he said. Yes. And you have evidence. Yes. He looked down at his tea. He picked it up and drank from it, and she watched his hands, they were steady, which was something. Who's been looking after him? He said. The pronoun was singular and specific, no need to name who. Currently, me, she said. He's been with me this week. Sirius Black looked up sharply. There was something in his face that was suddenly much more present than everything before it. He's with you. Yes. He was removed from the Dursley household last Wednesday. His expression did several things at once, cycling through something complex and rapid, relief and fury and grief, stacked so quickly on top of each other that she caught all three. He was with them all this time, he said. It was not a question. Yes. I asked. His voice had changed, lower, sharper, with something held very carefully underneath it. In my letters. I asked if he was safe. They said, I know, she said. I've read the file. She held his gaze. I'm sorry that your letters weren't answered properly. That's a failure of this department that I intend to address. She paused. For what it's worth, what I found when I pulled the welfare file is what led me here. To your case. They're connected. He was breathing slowly and deliberately, and she recognized that he was managing something internally, something large. How is he? He said. His voice was careful now, like he was measuring the amount of feeling he put into the question. He's remarkable, she said. It was the simplest accurate answer. He's reading Hogwarts, a history. He's learning to direct his magic from the inside. He named a frog Gerald. She watched him. He knows about you. He asked me to find out fast. Sirius Black's face did something it clearly hadn't done in some time, which was not quite break and not quite hold, but go somewhere in between that was its own kind of movement. He looked away. He breathed. He looked back. What was the fast part, he said. He said, she looked at her hands for a moment, recalling it. He said if you're innocent, then you're the only person who really knew his parents. Not from pictures or articles. Really knew them. The room was very quiet. Sirius put the tea down. He pressed the heels of his hands briefly against his eyes. He lowered them. He had the expression of a man arriving somewhere he had stopped expecting to arrive. He's James's, he said. That's a James thing to think. His voice was rough but warm, genuinely warm, and the warmth was the real thing under all the years of damage, she could hear it. James would have thought of that at 7. The exact important thing to focus on. He has Lily's eyes, Amelia said. I know. He looked at her. I know. I remember. He paused. Is he going to be there? Tomorrow? He asked to be there. I said yes. She looked at him steadily. Are you all right with that? All right with, yes. He said it immediately, then stopped himself. He looked at his hands. I don't know what I look like to him. What he knows about me. He might think, he knows what was publicly believed about you, she said. He knows I'm investigating. He knows there are questions. She paused. He is also 7 years old and not easily frightened. Something moved through Sirius Black's face that was, she thought, the beginning of something like real hope, real this time, not the careful tentative version, but the actual thing finding a crack to come through. Sounds like James, he said, quietly. He's also himself, she said. Quite thoroughly himself. Sirius looked at her. Thank you, he said. He meant it plainly and entirely, and she accepted it plainly. Tomorrow at 9, she said. Get some sleep. Thursday morning was clear. The rain had gone and left the sky a pure, specific blue that felt like an occasion. Harry was up at 6. He was dressed and sitting at the kitchen table before Susan was awake, before Amelia came down, in his best clothes which were still too large but were clean and pressed because Mrs. Hartley had quietly taken everything out of his bag 2 days ago and washed and ironed it without being asked, which was an act of care so practical and wordless that Harry had simply said thank you and meant it deeply. He was eating toast when Amelia came in. She was already in her formal robes, deep blue, very straight, the monocle on its chain that she never used but always wore for formal occasions in the way that armor worked. She looked at him. Ready, he said. It was not a question. Ready, she agreed. Susan appeared in the doorway. She was still in her dressing gown but she was holding a piece of parchment folded into thirds. I wrote something, she said. For Harry. For today. She held it out. He took it. He opened it. It was a short note in Susan's handwriting. You could tell it was short because she'd started in the middle, the way he'd shown her. It said, today is going to be important. You don't have to do anything except be there. You're allowed to just be there. Good luck. S. He folded it back up. He put it in his pocket. Thank you, he said. She nodded, once, decisive in the way she could be when something mattered to her. Go on then, she said. Both of you. The Wisengamot chamber was larger than Harry had imagined and louder than he'd expected. The tiered seats were filling with witches and wizards in plum robes. The public gallery above them had people pressed against the rail. Harry sat in the gallery to Amelia's left, next to Griselda Marchbanks, who acknowledged him with a single nod and said nothing, which he found appropriate. He looked at the empty chair below. It was a plain wooden chair in the center of the floor, facing the Wisengamot benches. It had arms and a high back and nothing else to recommend it. It did not have restraints on it, which Harry had wondered about. It was just a chair. Amelia stood at the floor level, at a lectern to the left of the chair, with her folder and her composed precision. Tonks was behind her at a smaller table covered in parchment. The chief warlock called the session to order. Voices in the gallery dropped. Amelia began. She laid it out. The procedural failure first: no trial, no hearing, no formal charges, 14 requests denied. She was methodical and unhurried, and the Wisengamot chamber went very quiet very quickly, because Amelia Bones presenting a case sounded like the ground settling, like something becoming permanent. Then the physical evidence, the blast pattern, Perkins's testimony which she read aloud, the margin of error on the identification charm, the animagus trace. Then the secret keeper argument, with Dumbledore's sworn statement submitted as an exhibit. She read from it once, clearly, Peter Pettigrew was the secret keeper. Not Sirius Black. The chamber erupted. Harry sat in the gallery and watched it, the movement across the faces below, the whispered conversations breaking out, one witch in the upper tier standing up and being called to order by the chief warlock. He watched Amelia stand absolutely still at the lectern until the chamber quieted, the way a rock sat in moving water, not fighting it, just being unmoved. Then the doors at the side of the chamber opened. Sirius Black walked in. He walked in with an aura on each side, Tonks and Shacklebolt, and he was wearing plain grey robes that were too large on him in the way that everything was too large on him right now, and his dark hair was around his face, and he walked with the particular gait of someone who had decided, internally, that they were going to walk normally or die trying. He sat in the chair. He looked at the Wizengamot with his two old eyes and his steady hands, and Amelia Bones walked to the center of the floor and said, "Sirius Orion Black. You were detained on October 1st, 1981, transferred to Azkaban on November 3rd, 1981, and have been held for 6 years without trial. This hearing exists to remedy that failure of the law. I ask the Wizengamot to hear the evidence in full and to determine, today, whether the case against you has any standing." She stepped back. The chief warlock asked if Black wished to speak. Sirius Black looked at the Wizengamot for a moment. His voice, when he found it, was rougher than it probably used to be, but it was level. "Peter Pettigrew is alive," he said. "He faked his death. He cut off his own finger and he transformed and he ran, because that's what he did. He always ran when things got hard and he always made someone else pay for it." He paused. "I've been in Azkaban for 6 years for a murder that didn't happen. I would like my life back." He said it simply. Without drama. In the tone of someone who has rehearsed nothing because there was nothing to rehearse, just the truth, finally being said in a room that was built for it. Harry, in the gallery, felt something in his chest that was large and shapeless and not yet nameable. He watched Sirius Black in the chair and thought about 4 letters asking "Is the boy alive?" and thought about his parents in Godric's Hollow and thought about a man who had spent 6 years in the worst place in the world for something he didn't do. He thought, "I believe him." He thought it the way he'd been taught to feel things this week, with the breath underneath it, the choosing underneath it. He felt it as a clean, solid thing, not soft, not sentimental, just the weight of knowing something to be true. The Wizengamot deliberated for 47 minutes. Harry counted the minutes on the large clock on the chamber's far wall. He did not move. Griselda Marchbanks next to him also did not move. Below, Amelia stood at the lectern, making notes on parchment. Sirius sat in the chair for the full 47 minutes. He did not look at the gallery. Harry didn't think he'd been noticed yet. The public gallery was full and Harry was small and he'd chosen the far side deliberately, not wanting to be a distraction. But then, about halfway through the deliberation, Sirius looked up at the gallery. He was scanning it in the systematic way that people who used to be Auror scanned rooms, not looking for anything specific, just looking. And his eyes traveled across the gallery and stopped. They stopped on Harry. Harry met his gaze. For a moment neither of them moved. The chamber around them was full of murmuring deliberation and shuffling parchment and the small sounds of 50 people in a confined space, and in the middle of all of it Harry Potter, age 7, with his taped glasses and Susan's note in his pocket, looked at Sirius Black across the chamber and found, in the grey exhausted eyes of a man 6 years gone, something that was unmistakably the thing he'd been trying to understand. The look of someone who knew him, specifically, not as a name or a symbol, but as a person connected to people they had loved. He raised his hand. Just slightly. A small wave, not theatrical. "I'm here." Sirius Black, in the chair below, made a sound that Harry couldn't hear from the gallery but that Amelia, standing close, heard clearly, something that was not quite a word and not quite a cry but was the sound of a person who has been holding something for 6 years and has just been given a moment to put it down. He raised his own hand. Small. Back. The chief warlock called the chamber to order. The vote was called. Harry looked at the clock and looked back at the chamber and held the breath technique underneath everything. 37 votes for exoneration. 9 against. 4 abstentions. The Chief Warlock's voice echoed through the chamber, Sirius Orain Black. This court finds that your detention was unlawful, conducted without proper process, and unsupported by adequate evidence. You are exonerated on all charges. All findings against you are expunged from the record. You are a free man. A pause, the kind that had weight. This court extends its formal apology for the failure of process that resulted in your wrongful imprisonment. The chamber noise was immediate and substantial. Harry sat very still. Below, Amelia walked to Sirius Black and said something he couldn't hear. Sirius was still in the chair. His hands were flat on the arms of it and his head was slightly bowed, and then he stood up, and Tonks was next to him, and then Shacklebolt, and then Amelia turned and looked up at the gallery, directly at Harry, with the look she got when she was telling him something that was complicated but that she didn't intend to make more complicated than it was. He stood up. He moved along the gallery row, past Griselda who gave him a small, precise nod, and he made his way toward the stairs down to the chamber floor. He came through the door at the floor level and into the space behind the lectern. The chamber around him was still in motion, people talking, robes moving, someone arguing near the upper benches, and he stopped there for a moment, just inside the door. Sirius turned around. He was taller than he'd looked in the chair. He was still far too thin and his robes were still too large and his eyes still had the depth of too many years in them, but he was standing and he was here and he was looking at Harry with an expression that was not put together or composed at all, it was just whatever it was, with no management, 6 years of walls down all at once. Harry looked at him. He thought about Godric's Hollow. He thought about his parents who he'd never known, and about the people who had known them, and about what it meant that the one person left who had known them had been somewhere unreachable for 6 years because of a sequence of failures that had finally, today, been pulled apart. He took 3 steps across the stone floor. Sirius Black, who had been an Auror and a Gryffindor and reckless and brave and who had spent 6 years in Azkaban asking if the boy was alive, folded himself down to eye level the way tall people did with small children, and looked at Harry up close for the first time since Godric's Hollow. "You look like your dad," Sirius said, roughly. "But you've got her eyes. Lily's eyes." "I know," Harry said. "People say that. It's true." He looked at him. His voice was trying to be steady and making a fair effort. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have, there were things I should have done differently and I didn't, and you were in Azkaban," Harry said. "Before that. There were things, you were trying to protect my dad," Harry said. It wasn't an absolution and wasn't meant as one, it was the boy's assessment, careful and fair, the same way he assessed everything. "You made mistakes. People did. A lot of people made a lot of mistakes." He said it without bitterness, without heat. He'd found the bottom of this particular thing in the last week and the bottom of it was just the facts, not anger at Sirius, not blame. The shape of what had happened, held clearly. "I just want to know them," he said. "My parents. What they were actually like. Not from books or articles. I want to know who they actually were." Sirius Black, on the chamber floor of the Wizengamot, looked at this 7-year-old who had been through things that should not be in a 7-year-old's history and who was asking for exactly the right thing in exactly the right way, and for a moment something in his face simply could not stay in place. "I can tell you," he said. "I can tell you everything." He cleared his throat. His voice was still rough but it was warm, genuinely warm, the way Amelia had heard when she'd mentioned Harry in the holding room. He was the worst. The absolute worst. He was the most infuriating, generous, loyal, arrogant person you ever met in your life. And Lily, he stopped. He looked at Harry's green eyes and his voice went somewhere private for just a moment before he brought it back. "Lily was the strongest person I ever knew. She made your dad better. She made all of us better. Harry looked at him. His face was the careful, open face of someone taking in something they'd always needed. Not overwhelmed. Just taking it in, properly. Okay, he said. Provisional. Trial basis. Meaning, I'll give you a chance. We'll see. It was, Sirius Black thought, the most devastating and wonderful thing he'd ever heard in his life. Amelia arrived at Harry's shoulder. She looked at Sirius Black standing up, at Harry standing still, at the chamber around them settling into its aftermath. She looked at the two of them and at the 6 years and the 14 letters and the one finger and all the machinery of failure and consequence that had produced this moment on this stone floor. She said nothing. She just stood there, which was the right thing to stand there for. Chapter 6, What Ground Feels Like the Ministry Canteen was not designed for emotional reunions. It was designed for eating lunch between 10 and 2, queuing efficiently, and having the kind of conversation that could be interrupted by a ministry owl without anyone caring. The tables were long and institutional and the lighting was the particular flat kind that made everyone look like they were being processed rather than fed. It was, objectively, a terrible place to begin to know someone. They ended up there anyway. It was Tonks who suggested it, with the practical instinct of someone who understood that what came immediately after the Wisengamot chamber was people standing in a stone room with all that air and no clear next step. Tea, she said, to no one in particular and everyone specifically. Canteen. Now. She herded them the way she did everything, cheerfully, with a complete disregard for the idea that people might not want to be herded. So they sat in the canteen at 11:30, Amelia, Harry, Sirius, Tonks, and Griselda Marchbanks, who had said she was only coming for the tea and was now on her second cup. Shacklebolt had gone back to his desk, though he'd briefly clasped Sirius's hand in the corridor in the way of a man saying something large with very few words. Sirius wrapped both hands around his cup and looked at the canteen with the expression of someone encountering ordinary things after a long absence and finding each one slightly arresting. Harry watched him do it. Watched him look at the tea urn, at a witch 3 tables over eating a sandwich, at the particular institutional ceiling, all with the contained attention of someone who has been in a place with nothing to look at and is now finding everything interesting. Remus, Sirius said suddenly. He said it to Amelia, not as a question but as a thought arriving late. Remus Lupin. Someone needs to, he doesn't know. He'll hear about the hearing through other channels and I'll send a message today, Amelia said. He'll want to see, Sirius stopped himself. He looked at Harry. He was a friend of mine. Of your parents. He'll want to see you. If you want that. Harry thought about it. Yes, he said. But not today. No, Sirius agreed immediately. Not today. He looked relieved that Harry had been the one to say it. They looked at each other across the institutional table with the combined effect of two people who had just established something about each other's preference for pacing, and found it matched. Griselda set her cup down with the decisive click of someone who had decided something. The legal situation, she said, to no one in particular, which meant everyone. Guardianship review will need to move now. The exoneration changes the case significantly. She looked at Amelia. I know, Amelia said. Timeline? Medical evaluation first. Properly, Mungos, not just the intake check. Amelia looked at Sirius. No arguments. I wasn't going to argue, Sirius said. You look like you were considering it. Something moved through his face that was, unexpectedly, wry. It was a brief, dry expression, in and out before it fully formed, the ghost of whoever he'd been before, surfacing through the damage for just a moment. I was considering it slightly, he admitted. St. Mungo's this afternoon, Amelia said. Full physical and cognitive evaluation. The guardianship fitness assessment is a separate step that runs alongside. There's no timeline pressure on custody, Harry is safe where he is. She looked at Harry when she said this, not explaining it to him but including him in it. What there is pressure on is making sure that if and when there is a change, it's properly supported and not just because the legal mechanism permits it. Harry understood what she was doing. She was moving slowly enough to be certain. He thought about Susan's note in his pocket, "You're allowed to just be there," and thought that this was what that looked like when it was done properly by an adult. You didn't rush the important things. You let them take the shape they needed. "I'm not going anywhere," Sirius said. He said it to Amelia, but he was looking at Harry. "I mean, I'm not in a hurry. I'm not going to push." He stopped. He looked slightly uncomfortable with how many sentences he was starting and not finishing, which was, Harry was beginning to understand, something to do with the kind of person he actually was rather than just Azkaban, someone whose brain moved fast and whose mouth tried to keep up and frequently didn't quite make it. "You talk like my dad did," Harry said. "In the descriptions." Sirius looked at him. "Jumping between things," Harry said. "In people's accounts. My mum too, but differently." She apparently finished all her sentences but started too many at once. Sirius's face was doing the thing again, the not quite holding thing, but steadier now than in the chamber. Like each time it happened it reasserted itself slightly faster. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, James was like that. He'd have about 4 thoughts at once and try to say all of them simultaneously and your mum would just..." He paused. He made a small gesture with his hand, like a conductor bringing something to a stop. "Sort it out," Harry said. "Sort it right out." He looked at Harry with the particular expression of a person finding someone who is both familiar and entirely new. "You've read about them." "Everything I could find," Harry said. Which wasn't a lot. The books are mostly about the war. They're not about them as people. He paused. That's the gap. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. "I've got 7 years of stories," he said. "I had about a decade with them before," he stopped. 7 years. All in my head. I've been, in Azkaban, the Dementors, they pull at the memories. Try to, pull the good out. But I held on. He said the last part simply and without any particular drama, as though it were just a fact about what he'd done for 6 years, and the simplicity of it was its own devastating quality. Every single story. I held on to every one. Harry looked at him. He filed what he'd just heard with the care he gave to things that were going to matter for a long time. Then he said, "Tell me one." Tonks, who had been quietly eating a biscuit and pretending not to listen, stopped pretending. Sirius looked at Harry across the canteen table. He thought for a moment. He chose the way you chose when you had 7 years of material and needed to find the right entry point, the one that opened into everything else rather than closing on itself. "Your dad," he said, "once transfigured McGonagall's desk into a dog in the middle of transfiguration class. Not a difficult transfiguration, he was 15, he could manage it easily by then. The trouble was the dog was alive, fully alive, and decided immediately upon existence that the classroom was threatening and needed to be barked at comprehensively." He paused. McGonagall stood there while the dog barked at her for about 30 seconds. Then she transfigured it back into the desk. Then she turned around and gave James a detention that lasted 3 weeks. He leaned forward slightly. "The thing is, and this is the thing that tells you everything about your dad, he was not sorry. Not even slightly. He was delighted. The whole point was to make Sirius and Remus laugh, and they had, and that was enough. He'd have taken 6 months of detention for that." Harry looked at him. "Was it funny?" "Absolutely," Sirius said. "The dog had James's hair. The same exact hair. Standing up in every direction. McGonagall noticed and didn't mention it, and we all knew she'd noticed because her mouth did the thing." He pressed his lips together tightly in an expression that was so clearly an impression of Professor McGonagall that Harry recognized it despite never having met her, because it was exactly how she was described in Hogwarts, a history. Your mum laughed for about 4 days afterward. She'd see James in the corridor and just start again. Harry was smiling. Not the careful almost smile of the last week. A real one, uncalculated, arriving without permission. He felt it on his face and didn't try to rearrange it. He thought about his father as a 15-year-old with a living, barking, identically haired dog and felt the thing he'd been trying to understand, the shape of his parents as actual people who had been actually young and actually laughing in actual rooms. It didn't fill the absence. Nothing was going to fill the absence. But it made the absence a shape he could understand, and that was different from the absence being just empty. Amelia was watching him from across the table with the expression she used when she was not going to say anything but was registering everything. Griselda had long since stopped pretending to read the document she'd pulled from somewhere, and was just listening. Sirius kept going. He had, it turned out, a lot of stories. St. Mungo's took the afternoon. Amelia went with Sirius, Tonks trailing behind with paperwork. Harry went back to Wiltshire with Griselda Marchbanks, which was unexpected and slightly formal but turned out to be fine because Griselda was someone who operated in comfortable silences and who, upon meeting Susan, identified her immediately as a person worth speaking to seriously rather than sweetly, which Susan responded to with visible relief. By the time Amelia came home at 7, Susan had given Griselda a full briefing on the frog situation, the Gerald naming debate, and the blast pattern evidence as she understood it from eavesdropping, and Griselda had listened to all three with equal attention and commented thoughtfully on each. Harry had been in his room for the last hour. Amelia knocked. "Come in," he said. He was at his desk with the torch on. He had a piece of parchment in front of him, not school work, just parchment, and on it he'd been writing in pencil, a list. She could see it from the door. It was titled, at the top, in his clear, slightly cramped handwriting, "What I Know About Them." She sat on the edge of the bed. He turned the chair around. He looked at the parchment and then at her. "Sirius," she said. "St. Mungo's says he's physically stable. Malnourished, some long-term effects from the Dementor exposure that will need ongoing treatment, but nothing that isn't addressable." She paused. "He asked about you from the medical bay. 3 times. Harry looked at the parchment. He traced the edge of it with one finger. "When can I see him again?" "He'll be at St. Mungo's for a few more days. The evaluation is thorough. After that," she paused. "After that, I'll bring him here, if that's all right." He looked up. "Here. There are things to discuss," she said. "About what comes next. And it's better to have those conversations somewhere familiar rather than somewhere new." She held his gaze. "You can tell me if you'd rather not." He thought about it. He thought about it honestly, with the full consideration he gave everything, not the quick reflexive answer. "No," he said. "Here is good." He looked at the list. "He knows things I don't know," he said. "He has 7 years of them. I've got," he gestured at the parchment, "about an hour's worth." "It's a start," she said. "Yeah." He picked up the pencil and looked at the list. He looked back at her. "What happens now? With everything? Pettigrew. Dumbledore's wards. All of it." She sat for a moment. Then she decided to give him the same thing she'd been giving him all week, which was the actual answer. "Pettigrew," she said. "Tonks is running a trace. The Enimiga signature is still active somewhere in the southeast, she's narrowing it down. We'll find him." She said the last part with the simple certainty of someone who has never once stopped finding something once she'd decided to look for it. "When we do, he'll face trial for what he actually did. Which is considerably more than faking his death." Harry absorbed this. "And then people will know," he said. "Properly. Not just from the hearing, but when he's found. What actually happened." "Yes." "Good," he said. It was the same word he'd been using all week for things that mattered and that he'd decided to mean rather than perform. He put the pencil down. The blood wards. Dumbledore said he was working on an alternative. He submitted a proposal this morning, she said. My curse breakers are reviewing it. There are two options, both of them are viable, both of them require a new anchor that isn't the Dursley house. She looked at him. One of the options would work if the anchor were a person rather than a place. Someone with a documented magical bond to you, like a godfather. He looked at her. He understood the implication and she let him find it himself without prompting. So if Sirius, he stopped. If the fitness assessment, if the assessment confirms he's fit for guardianship, she said carefully, and if that's what you both want, then the Fidelius variant ward could transfer to him as anchor. You'd be protected. Properly, actively, with someone monitoring it. She paused. It would mean living with him. When he's ready. When you're both ready. Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands and then at the list on the desk. He looked at Amelia. And if I didn't, he said. What if I wanted to stay here? He said it the way he made requests. Carefully. With the door held open to hear no if no was what it was. Is that allowed to be something I want? She looked at him steadily. Something shifted in her face, not the professionally composed movement she usually controlled, but something genuine and quieter. She'd known this was coming. She'd thought about it more than she'd meant to. She had a position prepared, practical and reasonable, that she'd rehearsed in the way she rehearsed difficult conversations. She didn't use it. Yes, she said. It's allowed to be something you want. He looked at her. I am not going to let the legal process push you somewhere before you're ready, she said. Or push you anywhere you don't want to go. The point of all of this, she gestured, briefly, at everything, the whole point, is that you get to be a person who has a say in his own life. Sirius being your godfather doesn't override what you want. It's a factor, not a decree. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I do want to know him. I want that. He was working it out as he said it, following his own thinking. And I like him. I think I like him. There's something about him. He paused. But I've known him for 4 hours. Yes, she said. And you've known me for a week. Yes. She looked at him. And yet here we are. He looked at her with the slightly dry expression that she'd begun to think of as his resting face when he was processing something that had an emotional component he was still deciding about. You said you'd find me a permanent placement, he said. Somewhere with someone who loves you specifically. I did say that. Is that here? He said it plainly, not with sentiment or performance, just as the logical conclusion of a sequence he was checking. Is that what this is? The room was quiet. The torch on the desk made a small warm circle of light and outside the window the garden was dark and still and Gerald was presumably on his stone doing whatever frogs did in the dark. Yes, Amelia said. She said it in the same way she'd said everything to him all week, without layering, without qualification, without the management of emotion that would have been dishonest. If that's what you want. That is what this is. He looked at her for a long moment. 7-year-old, taped glasses, list of parental facts written in pencil on a piece of ministry parchment, Susan's note in his pocket. She sat on the edge of his bed in her formal robes and met his gaze and did not look away. Okay, he said. It was the 3rd time he'd used it. She'd been counting. Each time it meant something slightly different and she'd heard all 3, the provisional okay of the ministry atrium, the building okay of the kitchen table, and this one, which was different again, which was the okay of someone who had been given enough ground to stand on that they were willing to call it theirs. She stood up. She straightened her robes. She looked at his list and then at him. Show me what you've written, she said. He turned the parchment around. She read it. It was the stories from the canteen, the dog, the laugh, for days of laughing in corridors, and beneath them a few lines that he must have added after she'd left this morning, sourced from the history and the articles he'd read, and at the very bottom, in slightly larger writing, "She made all of us better." SB, she looked at the attribution. She looked at him. "I wanted to know who said it," he said simply. "So I could remember where it came from." She handed the parchment back. She went to the door. "Dinner in 20 minutes, she said. "I know," he said. He was already adding to the list. Sirius came to the house on Saturday. He was released from St. Mungo's Friday afternoon with a sheaf of instructions, a healer-supervised potion schedule, and the genuine suggestion that he get some sunlight, eat regularly, and try to sleep in a real bed for a while, all of which he received with the expression of a man who had been told to do the thing he most wanted to do and was finding it slightly surreal. Tonks collected him. She brought him to Wiltshire in the early afternoon and knocked on the red front door and waited with her hands in her pockets. He looked better than Thursday. Not well, well was a long way off, but better, in the way that being given food and sleep and the ability to look out a window did things to a person. He was wearing clothes that actually fit, which Tonks had apparently organized with the cheerful decisive energy she applied to all practical problems. He stood on the gravel path looking at the house with the overgrown roses and the mossy wall with the expression of someone cataloging normal. The door opened before Amelia could answer it. Harry had been watching from the sitting room window, which he would not have admitted to anyone. He opened the door and stood in the doorway in the clear afternoon light and looked at Sirius Black, who looked back at him, and the garden was bright and the cat Thatcher was sitting on the garden wall watching everything with magnificent indifference, and for a moment no one said anything. "Nice house," Sirius said. "The roses are wild," Harry said. "Good roses go wild." He paused. Lily would have loved this garden. Harry stepped back from the door. Sirius came in. They spent the afternoon in the garden. It was Sirius and Harry first, while Amelia was inside with Tonks going over the Pettigrew trace update, and Susan was doing the thing she'd been doing all week with Harry but now applied to a new person, which was asking questions with absolute directness and registering the answers with absolute attention. She appeared at the back door within 10 minutes of Sirius's arrival and sat on the steps and looked at him and said, "You were a Gryffindor." "I was," Sirius said. "Do you think Harry will be?" Sirius looked at Harry. Harry looked back. "Probably," Sirius said. "Though he might give the Sorting Hat a run for it." "I was thinking Ravenclaw, actually," Harry said. Sirius looked at him with the expression that was becoming familiar, the recalibration, the "here is a person let me adjust." "You'd have the grades for it," he said. "But you'd be wrong." "Why?" "Because Ravenclaws learn for the information. You learn for the use of it." He paused. "That's a Gryffindor habit." Harry thought about this. It was the kind of observation that arrived in the form of someone who had known you for 2 days but was using a data set of people across decades to arrive at it. It felt, oddly, like a gift. "Maybe," he said. Gerald the frog appeared from behind the garden stone. He hopped twice and sat in the middle of the grass, looking at Sirius with the particular frog expression of someone reserving judgment. Sirius looked back at him. "That's Gerald," Harry said. "Gerald," Sirius repeated. He looked at Harry. "Did you name the frog?" "Susan named him." "I endorsed it." "Why Gerald?" "He looks like he's lived a complicated life." Sirius stared at him for a moment. Then he burst out laughing, not the laugh of someone managing their affect, not the careful social laugh, but the actual laugh, sudden and real and loud in the quiet garden, with his head back and his whole face in it. It lasted about 10 seconds and left him looking surprised by himself, the way people looked when they'd done something involuntary. "That," he said, "is exactly what James would have said." He looked at Gerald. "Hello, Gerald," he said gravely. "You do look like you've had a time of it." "Susan, watching from the step, had her chin on her hands and the expression of someone witnessing something they are filing carefully in the part of their memory reserved for important things. The afternoon moved the way good afternoons moved, not quickly and not heavily but with the particular rhythm of people finding their way into each other's company. Amelia came out at 4 with tea and sat in the garden chair. Tonks sat on the wall next to Thatcher, who tolerated this with the air of someone granting a significant concession. Sirius talked, he talked a great deal, with the energy of someone who had been quiet for 6 years and was rediscovering that he wasn't, actually, a quiet person, and the stories came out in the order he found them, not chronological, just whatever surfaced. Harry listened to all of them. He asked questions with the targeted precision of someone who knew what they were looking for and was finding it piece by piece. He asked about his mother's laugh. He asked what his father was afraid of, really afraid of, not spiders. He asked what they were like at his age, and Sirius said your dad at 7 was chaos in shoes and his mom at 7 had once argued a teacher into changing her own marking scheme and been completely right about it. Harry was quiet for a moment after the last one. Then he said, "That's useful." "Why useful?" "Because I've been wondering if arguing with teachers is a personality trait or a family trait," he said. "Good to know it's both." Sirius laughed again, and again it looked like it surprised him, and again it sounded completely real. Amelia and Sirius talked after dinner while Harry and Susan were in the sitting room. It was not a light conversation. Amelia didn't do light conversations about important things, and Sirius, she was finding, didn't either underneath the momentum of his personality. He was serious, had been, she thought, before Azkaban, and Azkaban had stripped a great many layers off of everything and left the bones of him visible in a way that was actually easier to talk to. They sat at the kitchen table with the remains of dinner and Amelia was direct, which was what she was. "The fitness assessment will take another 2 weeks, she said. "St. Mungo's have their process and it's thorough and I'm not shortcutting it." "I know," he said. "When it's complete, assuming it finds what I expect it to find, we'll begin the formal guardianship proceedings. Harry's welfare review is ongoing but the picture is clear. Magically and physically and emotionally he is," she paused, "he is doing better than he was doing 7 days ago, which is both the lowest bar I have ever had to clear and also genuinely true." Sirius looked at his hands. "What he said in the chamber," he said. "About wanting to know them. James and Lily." He looked up at her. He's not angry." "I expected, he processes things differently," Amelia said. "He goes to the bottom of something and finds what's actually there and works from that. He skips a lot of the emotional middle." She paused. "It's probably a survival mechanism. Whatever it started as, it's also just him." Sirius nodded slowly. He asked about what James was afraid of. "Not spiders." He was quiet for a moment. James was afraid of not matching. Of being just the famous hair and the Quidditch and the charm, without anything underneath it. He spent years being that person because it was easy and then Lily made him look at himself and he found out there actually was something underneath it. He paused. "Harry has the underneath part already. At 7. It's already there." Amelia said nothing, which was agreement. "I don't know how to do this," Sirius said, plainly. "I need you to know that I know I don't know how to do this. I was 21 when I went in. I don't have the first idea how to be what he needs. I know how to be a godfather to a baby. I have no idea how to be a godfather to," he gestured in the direction of the sitting room, "that. No one knows how to be a parent until they're doing it," Amelia said. "And everyone does it wrong some of the time. The question is whether you show up." She met his eyes. "Will you show up?" He looked at her with the expression that had the most of him in it, the real version, below the charm and the humor and the 6 years' damage. "Yes," he said. Simply, completely. "Then you'll figure it out," she said. "And I'm not going anywhere. Whatever the formal arrangement ends up being, I'm here." Susan's here. Griselda, Merlin, help us all. You're not walking into this alone. He looked at her. You didn't have to do any of this, he said. The file. The investigation. Any of it. I found the file, she said, exactly the way she'd said it to Griselda on the first morning. Once I found it, there was nothing else to do. That's not, most people would have filed it differently. Most people are not me, she said. He was quiet for a moment. No, he agreed. They're really not. He said it with the warmth that was his Real register, the one underneath the charm, genuine, uncomplicated. Thank you, he said. She picked up her tea. Thank me by doing the work, she said. The potions. The healer appointments. The sessions at Mungo's. All of it. She looked at him. You were a good person before. You have the materials to be one again. Don't waste them. He nodded. He looked at his hands. Will you tell me about him, he said. About the last week. What he was like. She thought about the ministry atrium. The taped glasses and the school bag and the broken toy car and the chin held up. She thought about Gerald the frog and the maths test with excellent work, Harry and the breathing technique and the compass pointing at him with the needle dragging back. She thought about you make decisions that cost other people and you should know when you're doing that, delivered to Dumbledore's face without cruelty, just precision. She told him. She told him all of it. She talked for a long time and Sirius listened with the absolute attention he had apparently possessed all his life and had spent 6 years sharpening. And when she got to the part about the torch in the drawer, he closed his eyes briefly and breathed out through his nose. And when she told him about the compass, he looked at her with an expression that was fierce and proud in the way that protectiveness looked when it had found its object. He's going to be extraordinary, Sirius said. He already is. I know, Amelia said. I said the same to Dumbledore. What did Dumbledore say? He agreed. Sirius made a face that was not entirely charitable toward Dumbledore, which she thought was reasonable. He's going to need someone in his corner who isn't playing the long game, he said. Who's just there for him? Yes, Amelia said. That is exactly it. They looked at each other across the kitchen table with the understanding of two people who have arrived at the same conclusion from different directions. The Pettigrew trace resolved on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the hearing. Tonks found him in Devon. He'd been living in a Muggle family's home for 3 years as their pet rat, which Amelia thought was one of the more comprehensively cowardly things she had encountered in 30 years of law enforcement. She sent Tonks with a full Auror team and the arrest warrant personally, and they brought him in alive and in his human form, which required some persuasion, and then tried him before the Wisengamot on charges of betrayal, conspiracy, and the murder of 12 Muggles, which was what the real Blast had actually done, Peter having cast it himself before cutting off his own finger and running. The trial took 2 days. It was not a complicated case, with Sirius Black's testimony and the Blast pattern evidence and the Animagus registration fraud and Pettigrew's own wand history. He was convicted on all charges. He went to Azkaban, where Sirius had been, and Amelia thought about symmetry without satisfaction. Justice wasn't satisfying in the way people imagined it to be, it was just correct, and correct had its own weight that was different from satisfaction. She told Harry on the evening of the verdict. He was in the garden, which was where he frequently was now, sometimes with Susan, sometimes with Sirius when Sirius came by, sometimes alone with Gerald and whatever he was working through. She sat beside him on the back steps and told him plainly, Pettigrew convicted, sentenced, sent to Azkaban. The record of events now formally and legally corrected. The public record of his parents' deaths and Sirius Black's wrongful imprisonment now part of the Ministry's official history. Harry listened to all of it. He was quiet afterward. Not upset, not cold, just quiet in the way he was quiet when something was settling somewhere important. Does Sirius know? He said. He was there for the verdict, Amelia said. He testified. Harry nodded. He looked at the garden wall. Is he all right? He will be. I'll ask him when I see him on Friday. He paused. He might need more stories. She looked at him. He tells me stories about Mum and Dad, Harry said. It helps him too, I think. Not just me. He said it as an observation rather than a feeling, in the way he said most things that were feelings, through the fact of them. He looks different after. Not better exactly, just, more like himself. Yes, she said. She thought about the laugh in the garden, surprising him, and about the kitchen table conversation where he'd said you have the materials and meant it. She thought about Sirius showing up every Friday and the way Harry had started leaving the sitting room door open when he came. Amelia, Harry said. She looked at him. He'd been using her name for about a week, not Ms. Bones anymore, not ma'am, which he'd tried once and dropped when she'd made a face. Just her name, which he used carefully and specifically, in the way he used everything. I've been thinking, he said, about what you said. About what this is. Yes. He pulled Gerald's stone toward him with his foot, a habit he'd developed, a kind of anchoring gesture. I want to live with Sirius, he said. He said it carefully but without hesitation, which was the texture of a decision he'd been working toward for 3 weeks. When he's ready. When St. Mungo's says yes. He paused. But I want to still be here. I want Susan and the garden and the frogs and, he stopped. He looked at her with the directness that was so entirely himself. I want you to still be, Harry, she said. Quietly. He stopped. You don't have to choose between things, she said. That is something you are allowed to understand now. You do not have to choose. She looked at him steadily. Sirius is your godfather. Susan is she paused, your Susan. And I am someone who is not going to disappear because a legal document moves to a different address. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, okay. The 4th time. She heard the shape of it, this one had no provisional in it at all. This one was just yes. She looked at the garden and said, Gerald is staring at you. Harry looked. The frog was, in fact, staring. He does that, Harry said. I think it's affection. For a frog. He's not just a frog, Harry said, with complete seriousness. He's Gerald. She let herself smile. Not the small controlled smile of the office but the real one, the one that Susan got all the time and that Harry had been getting incrementally more often over the last month. She let it be there without managing it. The garden was quiet and warm. Somewhere in the house Susan was writing a letter, she'd gotten considerably faster at them since Harry had showed her how, a fact she had mentioned to approximately everyone she knew. The cat was on the wall doing her work of profound indifference. The evening light was long and gold across the moss. The formal guardianship order transferred to Sirius on a Wednesday in early September. He stood in Amelia's office with the paperwork, looking at it with the expression of a man who had spent 6 years asking whether a boy was alive and was now legally responsible for him, and finding that the weight of it was precisely right, not too heavy, not light, but the actual weight of something that mattered. Harry was at school that day. His new school, in Wiltshire, where he'd enrolled 3 weeks earlier and was, by all teacher accounts, alarmingly ahead in every subject and doing fine socially, which in Harry terms meant he'd found 1 or 2 people worth talking to and was baffling everyone else with the quality of his critical thinking. Amelia had the paperwork across her desk. She had her seal. She looked at Sirius, who was standing straight and looking genuinely nervous for the first time since she'd met him, which she found unexpectedly endearing. You're sure, she said. I'm sure, he said. Completely sure. Completely, he said, and she could see that he was, completely and without reservation, in the way that he gave things when he gave them, without calculation or caveats. She sealed the order. She slid it across the desk. He picked it up and looked at it for a moment. He folded it carefully, more carefully than she'd expected from someone she'd pegged as fairly cavalier with paper, and put it in his inner pocket. "He's going to have questions," she said. "About everything. All the time. About magic and law and history and frogs and why people do what they do. He has a list on his desk that's currently 14 pages long." "I know," Sirius said. "I've seen the list. Some of the questions you won't know how to answer." "I know that too." He paused. "I'm going to be honest with him when I don't know," he said. "I'll tell him I don't know and then I'll find out." He looked at her. "That's the right approach, isn't it? For him specifically." "Yes," she said. "For him specifically, that is exactly the right approach." He nodded. He looked like a man who was going to leave the office and then do something with his face that he wouldn't want her to see, which she respected. She stood up and extended her hand. He shook it. His grip was steady. "Sirius," she said. "Amelia. You're going to be fine," she said. Not as comfort, as assessment. The tone she used for things she'd examined and found to be true. He looked at her. He said, "I know." He said it the way Harry said okay, the version with no provisional in it. Harry came home from school to find Sirius sitting on the back steps with Gerald the frog 3 feet away in his customary spot, both of them apparently engaged in some kind of mutual regarding. He dropped his bag inside the door. He came out to the garden. He sat next to Sirius. "It went through today," Sirius said. "I know," Harry said. "Amelia told me this morning." Sirius looked at him sideways. "You knew all day?" "Yes." "And you went to school anyway?" "There was a maths test," Harry said. Sirius stared at him for a moment. Then he laughed, the real laugh, the one that still surprised him sometimes but less often now, the one that had been there all along under 6 years of everything. "You're remarkable, you know that," he said. "Completely remarkable." "You said that last week," Harry said. "I'll keep saying it until it's not true." He paused. "Which will be never." Harry looked at Gerald. He thought about the last month, the ministry atrium and the taped glasses and the school bag and the torch in the drawer and Amelia on the back step telling him the truth. He thought about the compass pointing at him and the breathing technique and the maths test with excellent work at the top. He thought about the canteen and the dog with James's hair and his mother laughing for 4 days. He thought about Susan and the sparks off her right hand and the letter that started in the middle. He thought about what ground felt like. It felt like this. Like a back step in an overgrown garden and someone sitting next to you who knew your parents and had been asking if you were alive for 6 years and was now legally, permanently, specifically responsible for you. It felt like a frog named Gerald and a torch in a drawer and 4 times saying okay and meaning more each time. He thought, "I know where I am." He thought, "I know who's here." He thought, "That's what home is." "Susan bet me a galleon you'd be in Ravenclaw," he said. "She's wrong," Sirius said. "I know." He picked up a stone and turned it in his hands. "I'm going to win the galleon though. I'm not telling her until September 1st. Sirius grinned. It was the grin in the photographs, the one from before, real and wide and a little reckless. "Smart," he said. "James would have told her immediately." "I know," Harry said. "That's why I'm not." He said it without smugness, just with the easy certainty of someone who had been thinking about his father for a month and had arrived at a clear picture of both the greatness and the instructive flaws. Sirius looked at him with the expression, the fierce, proud, specific one, and didn't say anything, which was the right response. They sat in the garden while the light went. Gerald didn't move. In the ministry, Amelia Bones filed the last piece of the Harry Potter welfare case, stamped it closed, and set it in the completed archive. She sat for a moment in the particular quiet she had at the end of something large. She thought about a flagged file at 3:30 in the morning. She thought about a man in a small room who had never quite understood what he'd done. She thought about 14 letters answered by form letters. She thought about 6 years. She picked up her quill and started on the next report, because there was always a next report, always another file, always another child who needed someone to look at the actual thing in the actual file and not file it under passive monitoring and move on. She was very good at her job. She intended to keep being good at it. Outside her window London was going about its evening, ordinary and unglamorous, full of people who did not know that this week a man had been freed and a boy had been found and a frog named Gerald had observed both events from his stone with what could only be described as dignified satisfaction. Amelia Bones sealed her report, sent her owls, drank her cold tea, and went home. The light was on in the kitchen window when she got there. She could see Susan at the table, and Harry across from her, and Sirius leaning back in his chair with the easy posture of a man who was, slowly and with setbacks and with all the work still ahead of him, beginning to inhabit the world again. She stood on the gravel path for a moment and looked at them through the warm kitchen light. Then she pushed open the red door and went inside.